It was February 1994. A brand new game company was incorporated on the last day of the month by founder Ted Price, starting work on a Doom clone for the much hyped and promoted surefire hit, the Panasonic 3DO. Little did they know this company would go on to create sprawling universes, capturing the hearts of gamers young and old. Leaping generations upon generations of game systems and making the jump to the big screen, this company was about to produce one of the most prominent and beloved, still ongoing game franchises of all time. That company's name: Extreme Software. Ted Price wanted to make games. More specifically, a Doom game. Doom, the revolutionary first-person shooter released by id Software in 1993, was played by Price so much the inclination to make a similar product for consoles was an easy decision to make. Incorporating Extreme Software, Price set to work on his first ever video game, recruiting fellow Princeton graduate Alex Hastings later that year and his brother, Brian Hastings, soon after. After getting rejected by numerous publishers for their first game, Extreme found a home with Universal Interactive Studios, and the team worked on developing Disruptor. The game was to be released for the 3DO as development kits were inexpensive for the time. The 3DO itself was a highly promoted new console, even being named Time Magazine's 1993 Product of the Year, along with the likes of the Ford Mustang, personal digital assistants, and Mattis's low-fat ice cream. However, upon release, the 3DO was less than well received. By suggestion of Universal and their executive producer Mark Cerny, development was shifted to Sony Computer Entertainment's new PlayStation console. It wasn't much of a snag for Extreme Software, as the custom engine for Disruptor took just a month to convert to Sony's new platform. It helped that Universal Interactive Studios was brand new to the game industry and still learning, allowing creative flexibility for the development partners, including Extreme. One thing that couldn't be adapted to the new platform, unfortunately, was the company's name. Just 1 year into existence, and right before officially announcing Disruptor as their first title, a name change for the company was forced due to Extreme Software already being in use by a database company of all things. Numerous new names were thrown out: Ice Nine, Moon Turtle, Ragnarok Software, The Resistance, Incorporated. The name Insomniac was thrown in from Ted Price. There wasn't resounding agreement on the name. However, Insomniac was the first to clear legal, and thus Extreme Software was reborn as Insomniac Games. Disruptor was released November 30th, 1996 in North America, arriving in Europe 1 month later. The game received solid but not amazing reviews from publications praising its visuals, arsenal of weapons, and strategic gameplay. Criticisms were levied, however, towards the game simply being a Doom clone with changes some deemed not interesting enough to differentiate it from the competition. For example, the game's signature psionic abilities like shocking enemies and using a shield to block attacks. Of particular note were the full motion video cutscenes. They were called out for being cheesy and completely ridiculous, being so serious they came off as unintentionally comedic.
As soon as you lower this force field, there'll be hell to pay!
Hell was already paid, Lieutenant, by the innocent thousands who died on New Atlantis.
That's why you've always got to keep your eyes open. And watch your ass.
So I had them, shall we say, extracted from office.
Yeah? Well, it's quite comfortable, actually. I'm thinking about getting one for the barracks.
We're with the Alliance of Democracy, Jack, and we need your help.
Just remember, think fast, shoot fast, and kick ass.
Overall, however, Disruptor was regarded as an underdog game, the best game that nobody ever heard of, according to Price. The game received little to no advertising, and with its holiday release in competition with such titles on the PlayStation 1 like Tekken 2, Tomb Raider, Crash Bandicoot, and Bubsy 3D, Insomniac's first game release was a commercial failure, said Price.
I felt at the time the team was kind of down. The game didn't really sell. We sort of needed a breath of fresh air.
For their next project, it was time to pivot. While considering what to produce next, Mark Cerny brought up the fact that Nintendo had cornered the family market to extreme success, and the PlayStation console was sorely lacking in family-friendly games. At the same time, Al Hastings had developed a new engine for use on the PlayStation that would allow Insomniac to feature wide open vistas to potentially explore, wildly different from other games like Crash Bandicoot that featured linear, hallway-level design. After the intense, dark universe of Disruptor, Insomniac wanted to do something different. How about Dragon? Suggested Insomniac artist Craig Stitt, and thus Spyro the Dragon was born. Over the course of 3 years with one game a year released from 1998 to 2000, Spyro the Dragon became one of the PlayStation's most prominent characters, giving the company a mascot character along with Crash Bandicoot, the platforming franchise from Naughty Dog, also published by Universal Interactive. With a charming cast of characters, a light fantasy setting, a stellar score by Stuart Copeland, and fun level design to complement Spyro's versatile moves of gliding, charging, and fire breathing, Spyro was released to critical acclaim and stellar sales. Insomniac's second game was a hit. Sequels soon followed, with Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage releasing in 1999, and Spyro Year of the Dragon following that in 2000. Spyro was an absolute runaway success, with Year of the Dragon selling over 2 million copies worldwide alone. All three Spyro titles were also entered into the PlayStation Greatest Hits line, signifying strong sales across the board. It was a grand time to be at Insomniac, but with a major caveat. Under their deal with Universal Interactive, the beloved Purple Dragon was not the studio's to keep. The IP, intellectual property, they had created was not theirs to own. And after 3 games released in 3 years, Insomniac was ready to move on and try something new. Now at the end of the PlayStation 1 era, Insomniac had grown to a team of 30 people. With Universal maintaining the rights to Spyro, Insomniac made the decision to begin working directly with Sony on creating new games for their brand new console, the PlayStation 2. No more middleman. With the release of Spyro Year of the Dragon, Insomniac's 4-game partnership with Universal Interactive came to an end. In the middle of Spyro development in 1999, Insomniac began forming ideas for what would be their debut on the new PlayStation 2 system. The first, yes, first, concept that was developed was a game then known as Monster Knight, where players would control a fantasy non-human character named Mahdi, who could tame different classes of creatures and use them to fight. The creatures themselves would be captured by Mahdi and trained, evolving into stronger versions of themselves, giving the player more abilities and attacks to choose from. There was diversity in the creatures that could be captured, with them falling under different categories like weapons, items, transport, armor, and multi-class, being combinations of the other 4. One example of these creatures was the Swordling, a sword weapon with a shark-like head. Its first stage would be a basic melee weapon, able to fight enemies with it and potentially clear a path through environments. Its second stage of evolution would add on a bite ability, letting you hold onto objects and suspend Mahdi in air, while the third evolution would add a spit ability, allowing the shark head to shoot its teeth at enemies like projectiles, not unlike a gun. Other creature concepts were the Spitta, Ticklebug, and the Garamuth, to name a few. Monster Knight itself would have been a third-person action-adventure game with real-time combat and Legend of Zelda-like open world with multiple paths to follow, from various castles to more outlandish fantasy locales like a floating island. The game would have had a stronger focus on story as well, building a brand new fantasy world with a history and culture with an emphasis on the character development of Mahdi and various other characters. It still retained the whimsical fantasy adventure feel of the Spyro games, but aimed at a slightly older audience, as Insomniac was anticipating the PlayStation 2 to reach more adult gamers than the PlayStation 1. Another big ambition of Monster Knight was to create a world without loading screens, essentially one huge environment with multiple locations but without the need to fade to black to travel there. You'd get there completely in real time using the stronger processing power of the new console. While a bunch of concepts for Monster Knight were developed, the idea itself never truly gained traction within Insomniac's team, and they moved on to try something different. Monster Knight, while dropped, was on the right track of what Insomniac wanted to do. A game with platformer elements but isn't strictly just a platformer, and a game that was meant for an older, more mature audience with a stronger emphasis on character and storytelling. Whereas it was a Pokemon meets The Legend of Zelda, Insomniac's next attempt at a PS2 game would be Tomb Raider meets The Legend of Zelda, and would progress a lot further than Monster Knight ever did. Codenamed I-5, that is Insomniac's 5th game after Disruptor and the Spyro trilogy, the next foray into a PS2 game concept would be an idea that the team could really get behind, creating an action-adventure game that would shed Insomniac's reputation as purely a platforming game developer. Originally using Africa as a setting before being moved to Peru, I-5 would come to be known internally, somewhat jokingly, as Girl with a Stick. While a lot of the team was working on wrapping up Year of the Dragon, a few of the developers split off to really get to work on what would be Insomniac's PS2 debut, for real this time. Completely different from a purple dragon, the protagonist would be a young human woman with white hair with runes on her body that would glow when she performed martial arts. Not a platformer, not cartoony, more mature. Not too mature, however, just an older audience than the kids demographic that Spyro firmly landed in. This was the basis for I-5. At E3 2000, Insomniac had to present the idea to Sony, and they gave the green light. The PS2 was a brand new console, and Insomniac had to build a new engine. A basic engine was pulled together remarkably quick, but the real clincher was fellow ex-Universal Interactive company Naughty Dog, now working on their first PS2 title, Jak and Daxter: The Precursor Legacy, made the offer to share technology with Insomniac, giving them the ability to craft even larger worlds than they thought possible. A natural evolution of the broad vistas of Spyro to the concepts of an open world on Monster Night. The design of Girl with a Stick would be a lot more grounded. While there is still fantasy and magic in the world, there wouldn't be technology, and environments would be a lot more tangible, more natural. The titular stick would allow the titular girl to fight and traverse environments, and one example being able to stick the stick into a wall, and then using it to propel herself into the air to other areas. She could also place it in a crank to turn bridges around for traversal. The stick, or staff's abilities, would increase throughout the game, gaining such powers as deviation, possession, even turning into smoke to pass through bars or even locked doors. Ambitious ideas abounded. Rock giants, destructive environments, arena battles with an audience full of monks, beast riding, a shaman lion known as Lionel Richie. Insomniac was aiming for the stars for their first PS2 game. There really was a solid foundation in place, and after a few months, the team had a playable demo concept. There was one problem though. It just wasn't fun. When creating art of any kind, there has to be passion for it to truly come alive. For Insomniac, even though Ted Price was pushing hard for Girl with a Stick, that passion just wasn't there. With Spyro, Insomniac had adopted an everything in the kitchen sink attitude towards design. Find what's fun and put it in the game. That philosophy had expanded by the third Spyro game to feature multiple playable characters and different gameplay styles. Reflecting the culture of the time, Spyro could now skateboard. With a focus on an older audience on a new system, however, that sense of spontaneity was lost in the development of I-5. They had intended for the art style to be a big departure from Spyro, but in the end, the concepts the artists were putting out were still quite in the realm of cartoons, with many enemies having underbites reminiscent of the enemies found in the Spyro games, for example. The main protagonist's design changed several times too, for fear of being too generic. These changes would come months after being finalized, leading to a sense of stagnation and low energy on the project, and changing them led to a muddy vision of what the game was even supposed to be in the first place. The potential was there, but the game had too much going on. Gameplay mechanics were changed constantly, which would lead the developers to go back and rewrite code, a time-consuming process. The game's mature tone also was a drastic departure, and the sense of fun Insomniac had with the Spyro games was lost in the game's design and in the morale of the team. Showing the build to Sony was another warning sign.
What they said specifically was, hey look, if you guys want to release this, you can. We will support you. However, we don't think that there's going to be a market for this game.
Not the most positive news. But Price found it a blessing. If Sony had outright said they wanted to cancel the game, there might have been reason to try to push back harder and keep on with Girl with a Stick as a concept. However, Sony's support, with trepidation, forced Insomniac to take a step back and look at the game and see if it's really what they wanted to do. Half the team was not a fan, and that was enough. Insomniac canceled Girl with a Stick and it was back to the drawing board on a new idea. This would be the only time in Insomniac's history that they outright dropped a game project already in development, never to be revived. Normally, with something as big as a game cancellation, the news can be hard to take. However, the cancellation of Girl with a Stick was like a weight that had been lifted off of Insomniac's shoulders. Sure, it was disappointing that they were back to square one on what would be their first PS2 title, feeling like a bullet had been dodged had they continued to work unhappily on a project for another 2 years that most didn't have any passion for. The PS2 was already on the market, and as other companies like Naughty Dog now had a head start on their leaps to the new system, Insomniac was behind. But they could finally regain that sense of fun and develop a project that everyone would would be on board with. And now, back at the beginning of development, they gave themselves very little time to find the new i5. A wall was designated in the offices where anyone could put up an idea or concept for a game. Anything. It was Brian Hastings, one of the earliest members of Insomniac Games, that would post the idea of a little character who has cool weapons and flies from planet to planet. A radical departure from Spyro and Girl with the Stick. This concept rang true and the team was on board. Now into brainstorming mode. Insomniac threw everything they thought could work on that wall, on designing the new protagonist.
He was a lizard at one point. He was sort of a Marvin the Martian guy, which I think was sort of the original inspiration.
The idea grew and grew as developers threw more ideas around, like an arsenal of crazy, wacky sci-fi weapons for their lead character to use. A character who had now settled design-wise into a fox-eared, made-up furry alien creature dubbed a Lombax. The new i5 was coming together remarkably fast. Al Hastings' engine development on Girl with a Stick helped too, and very quickly, in just a few months, Insomniac had a prototype for this new concept that Sony enthusiastically approved of. There was just one thing missing. One goal Insomniac didn't want to lose from Girl with a Stick and Monster Knight previously was a new emphasis on narrative and character. The Spyro games had steadily grown more narrative-focused with more cutscenes, voice acting, and general character interaction. Now with the power of the PlayStation 2, Insomniac could push those narrative, more cinematic story ideas a lot further. So what if this alien creature had a small robot sidekick? Better yet, a small robot sidekick as a backpack. It was 2001, the PlayStation 2 was already on the market, and Insomniac Games had just canceled their planned title for the new system. While huge projects from other developers were on the horizon, the anticipated next game from the people behind Spyro the Dragon was still in the planning stages. Insomniac's chief creative officer, Brian Hastings, brought up the idea of an alien creature who traversed various planets collecting gadgets and weapons. With publisher Sony Computer Entertainment's full support, it was off to the races for what would become Insomniac's most notable franchise. After the woes that was Insomniac's previous attempt at a PlayStation 2 title, the excitement behind this new sci-fi concept was the jolt the team needed. Concepts from Spyro, along with the abandoned ideas of Monster Knight and Girl with the Stick, would inspire the wide-open vistas of Insomniac's new game's various planets. The alien creature at the center of the story, originally a reptile-like animal, was now a Lombax, a furry-tailed, pointy-eared anthropomorphic fox thing that ran on two legs. His robot sidekick too went through various designs, once acting as a Swiss army knife of gadgets for the Lombax to use, even being a team of robots at one point. Focusing in on the idea of innocence, at one point the robot was even envisioned as a young playmate for the main character. Eventually, both characters' designs were fully formed after fast iterations in their design. Ratchet and Clank were born.
It felt like a breath of fresh air. It was great to get back to doing more mascot-based platform-type games where our imagination could just run wild. Anything could happen.
The real hook for the team was the idea of weapons and gadgets as the primary collectibles. This, coupled with a desire to move away from strictly mascot platformers, led to an exciting period of creativity and brainstorming at Insomniac. The third-person shooter genre didn't fully exist yet. Insomniac was creating something entirely new. The mascot platformer crossed over with the big action of a shooter. Ditching the fully fantastical floating isles of the Spyro games, Insomniac set out to create a world, while still filled with sci-fi splendor and wonders not seen in the natural world, that was grounded in its own sense of reality. Buildings weren't just floating in colorful abysses. They were tangible and had roots and sprouted from the ground. With the immense new power of the PlayStation 2, Insomniac's own efforts in developing their own engine, along with shared tech and rendering techniques with close development neighbors Naughty Dog, the brand new locations across this new title had the ability to truly come alive in a way not seen in gaming before. It was a technical marvel. Not least of all from this period was the incredible amount of ideas Insomniac had for the arsenal of weapons Ratchet would gather throughout his adventure. While always having a trusty wrench to bash enemies and objects with, a signifier of Ratchet's small-time mechanic beginnings, the team threw out absolutely ridiculous ideas for ways for Ratchet to fight. A giant boxing glove that walloped enemies, a flamethrower that scorched them to ash, a decoy weapon that would toss out silly inflatable Ratchets, a disco ball that could cause enemies to stop what they're doing for an impromptu dance dance break. Some made the cut, and some would have to wait a bit longer to see the light of day. After the problems with Girl with the Stick, the development of Insomniac's new 5th title, now officially titled Ratchet & Clank, progressed quickly and smoothly, with the goal of releasing the game for the holidays in 2002, 2 years after the launch of the PlayStation 2 console. The bigger focus on narrative would be a major factor in the game as well. While aiming at an older, more mature audience, Insomniac still sought to keep an atmosphere and tone of fun from the characters, now fleshing out to include various other alien creatures like Big Owl, a typical science geek, to Captain Quark, a well-known intergalactic superhero who Ratchet looks up to that may have a bit of an ego problem. While not an especially in-depth tale, Insomniac sought to set the groundwork for a fully lived-in universe. Literally, with dozens of different alien species and biomes populating across a bunch of different levels. It was ambitious, to say the least. The real hook was creating the relationship between Ratchet and Clank themselves. Ratchet was written to be a bit of a hothead, the attitude of a teen who just wants to get out of his small town and see the world and go on adventures. Clank, on the other hand, contrasted Ratchet by being the more even-tempered of the two, having a strong sense of intelligence while still being a bit naive to the world around him. A sort of buddy cop dynamic was formed, hopefully endearing players to the duo and empathizing with them. The story, as created by the team at Insomniac, goes that Ratchet, a mechanic on his home world of Veldin, discovers Clank after the robot crash lands nearby. Clank reveals that he's on a mission to stop the villainous business tycoon Chairman Drek from destroying dozens of populated planets to harvest their resources to create a new, perfect home for the Blarg. Ratchet and Clank seek out Captain Quark, a superhero and an egotistical celebrity, to take on and defeat Drek. But unfortunately, the hero Ratchet looked up to betrays the duo and reveals he's been working for Drek the whole entire time, having been promised a lucrative spokesman deal for the soon-to-be-completed new planet, as Drek sends every soldier he's got to take out the Lombax and robot. Eventually, Ratchet learns that Veldin, his home, is the next planet on the chopping block for Drek and his deplanetizer device. While collecting various weapons and gadgets and making new friends and allies while participating in a hoverboard race or two, Ratchet and Clank work to free the Blarg-captured planets as they eventually reach a final showdown with Drek back on Veldin. Drek reveals that he polluted the Blarg's original planet to make it uninhabitable, setting his evil plot in full motion. He plans to follow through with creating a new Blarg homeworld, but intends to pollute the new one again so he can maximize profits and keep creating new planets while destroying hundreds in the process just to line his pockets. After an intense fight, Drek is defeated as he's destroyed along with the new Blarg planet with his deplanetizer. Clank is injured in the struggle, and after the dust settles, Ratchet takes him home to fix him up, as the pair become true friends. Moment-to-moment gameplay achieved what Insomniac was going for. They were no longer just a platformer game developer. Platforming still was an important part of Ratchet and Clank, but the addition of gadgets along with the more puzzle-focused segments, where players controlled Clank on his own, created a hybrid genre experience that was brand new to video games. Ratchet himself had all the hallmarks of a platforming character. He could run, jump, do a basic melee attack, and the new addition for Insomniac, shooting. The endless list of weapons and gadgets were eventually narrowed down to a still sizable 36. There was even extra content included, where once players completed the game's story, a new challenge mode would be unlocked that increased the game's difficulty but allowed players to keep all of their weapons and upgrades from their previous playthrough. While the struggle to get to the final concept was an arduous process, Ratchet & Clank proved a critical and commercial success for Insomniac when it released in November of 2002. Critics praised the graphics, vibrant worlds, and varied gameplay of the title, even winning several awards for its visuals from various publications. While reception was universally positive, some criticisms were lobbed at the characterization of Ratchet himself. The voice acting of Ratchet, played by Mikey Kelly, and Clank, voiced by David Kay, were generally praised, but some felt that Ratchet's cocky, immature attitude made the character unlikable, and that Ratchet and Clank didn't come off as characters that actually wanted to be around each other.
I would devour courses like that for breakfast!
Bet that's not all.
Blast it!
Look, plumber's crack.
What did you just say?
Nerd.
I like him.
This isn't the real Captain Quark, you numbskull. It's a robot. We saw you, screaming for help.
I am unsure about your logic.
You think too much. Come on, let's go.
The story was also criticized for being a bit bland and slow to get going. Insomniac was still new to telling more in-depth stories in their games, so the comments and the characters were taken to heart. Develop your heroes and their relationships. If the audience doesn't care about them, they won't care about your world. Even with these cons, it was full steam ahead for Insomniac Games. Ratchet & Clank sold over 1 million copies, and a brand new franchise for Insomniac and PlayStation as a brand was solidified in gaming culture. With success, Insomniac grew as a team, growing from a small team of 32 by the time the development of their next title, over 100. Ratchet & Clank was a cash cow, and the next step was to create a sequel, one that would release just over a year after the 2002 original. The chance to do a sequel in the video games industry is a ripe one. After building a solid foundation in the first game, Insomniac now could take what worked and what didn't, and refine everything, from graphics to gameplay to characters to story. The main ethos for the sequel's development was to broaden the scope of every aspect of the title. More RPG-like progression, more variety in its environments, along with bigger levels and worlds. Even more story-driven. It was all to reach a goal of making an even better game that was completely different than anything else on the PlayStation 2, or any console for that matter. Additions to the sequel included more refined shooting controls, as Ratchet could now strafe side to side, while adding in other mini-games and puzzles like space combat and gameplay segments where you got to play as a kaiju-sized Clank. Additional new challenges like gladiator arena fights, an idea carried over from Girl with the Stick, were included along with hover bike racing. Ideas from the first game that didn't make it in originally, like explorable spherical worlds, were added in for new variety to the game's already extremely varied environments. These bonus areas were dubbed maxi games by the team, as just calling them mini games seemed to write them off as mere diversions. The spherical worlds were a new development hurdle for Insomniac as well, as the levels had to function in a specific size that wasn't too big or too small, along with having its own type of physics with the naturally lower gravity of the smaller planets. This bled into the combat and weapons, with all of them having to function with all of these modifications, coded primarily by Peter Hastings. Ratchet's character was recalibrated to be more likable, and he was recast with actor James Arnold Taylor taking over the role.
We have to get to the moon base to find Quark. If Drek is there, Quark is probably with him. You did great. Now, let's go get that experiment back.
The weapons became more of a priority too. An RPG-like leveling system was added to each weapon, with more than a dozen new weapons added, placing more emphasis on the shooting gameplay. Returning weapons from the original Ratchet & Clank could also be obtained for free from the in-game weapons vendor if players had a save file from the original on their memory card. Ratchet could now also upgrade to new armor sets, increasing his defense as well as refining the upgrade system for nanotech, Ratchet's health. The storytelling became even more of a focus as well. Insomniac still did not have a dedicated writer position on the team for writing the game's numerous cutscenes. As such, Oliver Wade, lead animator on the game, served as the primary writer for the game's story. This time around, Ratchet & Clank have become celebrities after the defeat of Chairman Drek. Because of their new fame, the duo are recruited by Abercrombie Fizzwidget, the CEO of the company Megacorp, to hunt down a mysterious thief who has stolen the company's biological experiment for unknown reasons. Ratchet & Clank agree to help and are transported to the Bogon Galaxy to aid the company and its founder. In pursuit of the thief, Ratchet has to deal with the mercenary organization Thugs for Less, who have been hired by the thief to stop them. They eventually catch up to the thief and get the experiment back. However, upon returning it to Fizzwidget, the CEO promptly and accidentally dumps the duo in the desert.
How about a little flying music?
Where they discover that the thief is in fact another Lombax named Angela Cross. Angela tells them that she was once an employee of Megacorp, who quit when they started pushing for the experiment, a thing she claims to be a threat to the galaxy at large, to be released en masse as Megacorp's next big product. The duo head to a testing facility that features video footage of the experiment becoming extremely violent and dangerous, attacking Megacorp scientists. Soon after they, along with new ally Angela, have learned that Megacorp is duplicating and is about to sell the experiment, now known as a protopet. Believing Fizzwidget to be unaware of the protopet's danger, Ratchet attempts to get in contact with the CEO, only to be slowed down by Thugs for Less, now working for Megacorp. Angela is captured, and Ratchet and Clank discover that Abercrombie Fizzwidget is none other than Captain Quark in disguise, having kidnapped the real Fizzwidget and installed himself in disguise as CEO in order to intentionally unleash the threat of the protopet on the galaxy, and then save the day as Quark, restoring his reputation after working with Drek. However, Quark's attempts to set the original protopet berserk backfires, causing the creature to grow to gargantuan size and promptly eat him.
Bobby!
An epic fight with the giant protopet ensues, and once it's defeated, Ratchet and Clank save Quark's life, and Angela recovers the real Fizzwidget along with stopping the already unleashed protopets from causing any more havoc. The duo settle down in a new apartment in the Bogon Galaxy, and Quark faces punishment by becoming the new test subject for Megacorp's upcoming product, the Crotchetizer.
Oh, one more thing!
Simply put, the sequel was even better received upon its release than the original. The game was officially titled Ratchet & Clank Going Commando, setting a precedent of innuendo-filled titles throughout the series' run.
When they pitched Going Commando to me, I didn't know what that meant. I was like, sounds good, okay.
Going Commando was critically acclaimed for taking everything that worked in the first and just making it all work even better. Insomniac had struck lightning. Again. Just a year later. Turning a new game around in such a small period of time was a gargantuan task. But at this point, Insomniac Games had truly become a household name, allowing the hiring of dozens of new employees to handle the new workload. What had started as Ted Price's dream to make console games had reached its fruition. Insomniac was now one of the biggest names in console gaming. The train didn't stop there. Not at all. With the even greater success of Going Commando, critics praising the refined gameplay, story, characters, and maxi games, it was time to develop a third game in the Ratchet & Clank series, turning it into a trilogy. However, there was the definite fear from Insomniac of gameplay growing stale. After 2 successful games, the Ratchet & Clank gameplay formula worked like a charm, but there was always different ways to refine the experience even further. With the third title in the series, Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, Insomniac sought to amplify what truly stood out with the series from the rest of the pack, and that was, well, the arsenal. Starting out, Ratchet & Clank was a platforming game with shooting. By the time development was well underway with the third title, the series had grown into a shooter with platforming. The focus had shifted. With Up Your Arsenal, the Ratchet & Clank series fully embraced the mechanics of a third-person shooter, adding in new features like a more open level design and featuring big battlefields with various tactical objectives, and even a new lock-strafe control scheme option to further emphasize the shooting. Up Your Arsenal would also add online multiplayer for the first time to the series, developed by its own small team within Insomniac, featuring various online modes like Capture the Flag, Siege, and Deathmatch, with up to 8 players online with voice chat. These modes could also be played offline as well. But online gaming was a whole new world for Insomniac. The single-player experience maintained the series' high pedigree as well. The weapon and gadget selection expanded even more with more upgradable levels and modifications to the player's arsenal. More new maxi games were added as well, most notably side-scrolling platforming segments, where players controlled the comic book version of Captain Quark as he hopped around short levels revealing his history as a superhero. Clank gameplay sections returned as well, but as Insomniac viewed the usual Gadgetbots Clank order around to be a bit less interesting on a third go-around, the mutant monkey Scrunch was added to liven up these sections, with the included and delightful Banana Gun. Up Your Arsenal also saw a significant step for Insomniac as developers, as instead of using outside software like Autodesk Maya, a 3D computer graphics application, for their level editors, they instead developed their own internal level editing tool to rely on instead. This, along with now being completely comfortable with the PlayStation 2 as a system, meant levels could be even more diverse and large compared to the already sizable, lush locations of Going Commando. Cutscenes became more elaborate as well, with a music video of in-universe pop star Courtney Gears being more visually complex than anything Insomniac had done before.
This goes out to all you robots across the galaxy. It's time for you and me to rise up and strike back. Don't stop until we dominate. Won't you feel great when we exterminate all organic life?
Story-wise, Up Your Arsenal would too set another high watermark for the series. Previous Ratchet & Clank games were written by the animators and programmers, but the third title in the series would see the hiring of an actual dedicated writer, Brad Santos. While relaxing in their new home in the Bogon Galaxy, Ratchet receives word that his home planet, Veldin, is under attack by the alien race known as the Tyrannoids. The villain behind this is a maniacal robot scientist known as Dr. Nefarious, a debatable genius who has a penchant for breaking down when enraged, triggering a soap opera to broadcast out of his head.
Oh, Janice, you will always be the love of my life.
You really should have that looked at.
Ratchet and Clank join an elite force known as the Galactic Rangers to take on this new threat, and their first mission leads them to seeking out Captain Quark, the only person to have defeated Nefarious before. The Rangers act as a sort of reunion for previous side characters from previous games like the nerdy Big Al and the hoverboarder Skid McMarks, along with new characters such as the Ranger Captain Sasha. It turns out Dr. Nefarious' big, evil plan is to turn squishies, that is, organic beings, into robots with his super weapon known as the Bio-Obliterator. Nefarious isn't alone with his anti-squishy sentiments. He also recruits such characters like Courtney Gears, and a parody send-up to then-current pop star sensation Britney Spears to produce music videos continuing propaganda for fellow robots to fight back and destroy
Organic life!
Using Clank's fame as he has recently been starring in a TV series known as Secret Agent Clank, the duo arrange a meeting with Gears only for Clank to be kidnapped. The Rangers suffer more blows when one of their own, Skid McMarks, is turned into a robot.
Like destroy all squishies, dude.
The Starship Phoenix, the Ranger's ship, is attacked, and while most everyone escapes, Quark chooses to stay behind trying to allegedly gather intel, and seemingly dies when the ship is destroyed. The Tyrannoids invade various planets, including the bustling city of Metropolis, as the Bio-Obliterator is activated, turning the Tyrannoids and the Metropolis population into robots. Ratchet recovers Clank from Nefarious after having to fight an evil Clank doppelganger known as Clunk, and unsurprisingly discovers that Quark had faked his death to get out of fighting Nefarious because of his own cowardice. Roping Quark back in, Ratchet and Clank infiltrate the Bio-Obliterator and destroy it, only to discover a second Bio-Obliterator has already been produced and is ready to go on the attack. Finally confronting Nefarious with the actual help of Quark for once, Ratchet and Clank destroy the second weapon and Nefarious loses, transporting himself and his sarcastic butler Lawrence to a distant asteroid where they can't bother anyone ever again. Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, alternatively titled simply Ratchet & Clank 3 in Europe and Japan, would continue the critical and commercial success of previous titles, with the third game being the highest reviewed and highest selling in the series when it released again just a year later after going commando in November 2004. Praise was given for the stylized visuals as the worlds and characters became more detailed and vast, pushing the PlayStation 2 to its absolute limits. The pivot to more shooter-based gameplay and multiplayer was also lauded, along with a strong story and very funny script.
She always seems so sweet and innocent in her videos. Well, except for that one with the... you know...
The Ratchet universe may have been a bit slight in the original game, but Insomniac had listened to fans and had crafted a cast and setting that could be easily invested in, creating some of the most fun storytelling and writing in gaming for that generation of consoles. The music too by composer David Bergeau was praised, having crafted themes for all three Ratchet games up to this point that were catchy, fun, and wonderfully integrated into the game. It paid off too that Up Your Arsenal was the most complex Ratchet title to date, featuring even more gameplay styles than Going Commando, along with the return of fan-favorite features like the Battle Arena. The storytelling was more complex and further integrated with the gameplay, notably using the Starship Phoenix as a primary hub for going to various levels, and also featuring training courses, vendors, large rooms that allowed players to really feel like they're on an elite starship, and even a bridge where players could listen to the now large cast of characters converse. Releasing to such strong sales and reviews, where was Insomniac to go from here? Like Spyro before it, they had completed an acclaimed trilogy over the course of just 3 years, an almost insurmountable task that could only be completed by the enormous effort and ingenuity of the Insomniac team. So that was it. Like Spyro before it, Insomniac had said what they had wanted to say with Ratchet & Clank by the end of Up Your Arsenal. They had found the winning formula, the ethos of the series: beautiful stylized visuals, fun relatable characters, imaginative weapons, exploration, and a balance between shooting and platforming. But with the want for a fourth entry in the series, how could they avoid franchise fatigue? 3 entries in 3 years is a lot, and a fourth, again, just 1 year later, might be less than well received. Insomniac began to look at the gaming industry at large. What if they went with a more open world mission structure like the Jak and Daxter series? Or maybe go really open world like Grand Theft Auto? From this research, Insomniac turned their gaze at the ongoing Halo series, which had released Halo 2 in 2004 for the Microsoft Xbox to enormous success. There was a sci-fi series that took itself more seriously, had darker storytelling, fun co-op multiplayer, and an eclectic set of weapons that was adored by fans and critics. Insomniac had the philosophy of adapt or die. Listen to what the people want, refine the games to those expectations, and succeed. If not, failure. Insomniac's first idea for a fourth game was known as Ratchet & Clank Nexus. The idea was that Ratchet & Clank would find themselves on a single planet for the entire game as they dealt with an intense war between 2 alien races as the duo see each side of the conflict. The concept never made it past the early stages, and the idea of a single planet for an entire game would be shelved for a potential later title. Instead, the fourth entry in the Ratchet & Clank series would go dark. Ratchet Deadlocked would mark quite the departure for the series. Designs were harsher and more intense, with emphasis on more moody, dramatic levels. Gone were the double entendres, and even Clank was dropped from the game's title entirely. Whereas previous games had a balance of shooting and platforming, Deadlocked would take the more open mission-based gameplay that popped up in Up Your Arsenal and make it the entire focus, with emphasis on action shooter gameplay for the absolute majority, along with various fighter vehicles as players completed various mission-based objectives on grimmer, more mechanical-looking locations. Clank was also no longer playable, serving as the guy in the chair for Ratchet, communicating with him over intercom to aid him in his journey. Quark was also removed too, with less focus on comedy and more on higher stakes and darker storytelling, as Ratchet found himself trapped in a gladiator game show called Dread Zone. Comply and Compete, or the explosive collar around his neck, along with Clank and returning character Big Al, would explode, killing them. It was definitely a more intense story, as Ratchet had to fight his way through Dread Zone as various heroic figures are kidnapped and forced to fight to the death by the creator of the show, Gleeman Vox.
Time for some real action. It's time to blow it up!
Ratchet's success in Dread Zone leads to the previous star of the show, washed-up hero-turned-murderous gladiator Ace Hardlight, becoming jealous and wanting to take him out. Ratchet, however, defeats Ace, receiving one final warning from the former hero to not let Vox get his claws into him. Upon meeting with Vox, the conniving creator attempts to sway Ratchet to join him with swanky merchandise deals, becoming the new star of Dread Zone. When Ratchet refuses, Vox forces him to participate in an arena challenge that has killed everyone sent to it. Ratchet thankfully survives. At the same time, Clank works on a way to free them from Dread Zone. As a last resort to end Ratchet's life, Vox decides to destroy the Dread Zone facility with explosives. But with the help of Clank's knowledge of the station, Ratchet is able to stop the detonators and activate the facility's escape shuttles, enabling everyone to make it out alive. With no pods left, however, Ratchet is stranded with Vox, who manually activates the self-destruct. If he's going down, he's going to take Ratchet with him. Thankfully, Alan and Clank are able to swoop in at the last minute and rescue Ratchet, leaving Gleeman Vox to perish and shut down Dread Zone for good. It was an intriguing story that was received fairly well, but Ratchet Deadlocked, while still a commercial success, was less of a critical one compared to the previous 3 games. Reviews were still positive with praise towards the new elements like the co-op multiplayer, but many felt that while the game was very good, it just didn't feel like a great Ratchet & Clank game. Gone were the imaginative weapons, traded in for more generic ones with a lot of customization options, the most in the series to date. Clank was absent from much of the story, removing the fun buddy dynamic. Worlds were no longer about exploration, but instead about completing various objectives and going from point A to point B in big battlefields with loads of enemies. The humor was still there, but the darker story muted it to an extent, and in turn, the fun. Insomniac looked at the reception and saw they had made a mistake. They had moved the needle and adapted the Ratchet formula, but maybe they had moved the needle a little too far. Ratchet Deadlocked would be Ratchet's and Insomniac's final game on the PS2. While the early goings in the system proved difficult with the shelving of Girl with a Stick, Insomniac never could have expected the gold they would strike with Ratchet & Clank. After a delayed debut on the PlayStation 2, Insomniac created 4 complete games in the series over the course of 4 years. A series run by one developer in such rapid succession that it's unheard of to this day. And while Deadlock made the series' system's swan song a bit more muted than intended, what a run it had been. After 4 years, Insomniac had crafted a beast of a franchise. Not only were there now 4 core games, but Ratchet & Clank had spun off as a mobile title for phones, aptly named Ratchet & Clank Going Mobile. Ratchet was also a hit in Japan, where a manga series based on the games, translated as a Ratchet & Clank Bang 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 Critical Danger of the Galaxy legend, was launched and serialized in Japan's CoroCoro comic in 2004. The series was a big moneymaker for Insomniac and publisher Sony, with quality to back it up. Not only that, but Ratchet & Clank were now in the pantheon of iconic Sony gaming characters, and Insomniac's second two after Spyro on the original PlayStation. Even if Deadlocked was a slight misstep, the series would continue. Fans cared about these characters and this world, and really they couldn't get enough of it. Franchise fatigue was always a concern, but Insomniac's adapt or die mentality allowed for the series to pivot with each entry and maintain a sense of freshness that was unrivaled in the industry. Even if changes didn't always ring completely true, they allowed Ratchet & Clank as a series to stay in the minds of gamers around the globe. However, changes were afoot at Insomniac. What was once a small team of developers had now grown to an absolutely enormous group, a team that could now develop multiple titles in parallel instead of focusing on just one at a time. While a team toiled away on Ratchet Deadlocked, another team set their sights on a new horizon, the Sony PlayStation 3. The Sony gaming brand was making the jump to high definition, and Insomniac wanted to be ready at launch this time instead of having a game arrive 2 years after the new console's release. This new team would work on a darker, more mature title in a genre Insomniac hadn't touched since their very first game as a company, the first-person shooter. But after Deadlock's completion and the other development team working on what would become the PlayStation 3 launch title Resistance Fall of Man, what of the Lombax? What could be next for Ratchet & Clank? Well, it was back to basics for the dynamic duo, as Insomniac made the decision to pivot back away from the darker, more shooter-focused gameplay and return to what fans loved about the series originally. But still, adapt or die. What could be done to make a new Ratchet & Clank game on a brand new console feel fresh and new and not completely derivative of the past? A return to the platforming shooter roots was in order, with an eclectic cast, the return of Quark, and even more wacky and imaginative weapons. For instance, what about that disco ball weapon that never got implemented into the PlayStation 2 games? And also, what the heck was a Lombax really anyway? With the focus on Resistance, after 2005, 2006 would be the first year since 2002 without a Ratchet & Clank game released by Insomniac. fans were left to wonder if the franchise was truly over, if Ratchet & Clank was to be left behind on the PlayStation 2, like its fellow platformers at the time like Jak and Daxter and Sly Cooper, as teams moved on to more mature projects like Uncharted and Infamous. However, with a jaw-dropping tech showcase debuted at the 2006 Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, California, Insomniac made it clear that Ratchet & Clank's adventures were only just beginning. Compared to their late launch on the PlayStation 2, when the successor was revealed, the PlayStation 3, it was hit the ground running with Insomniac. While a team worked to bring Ratchet Deadlock to release in 2005, Insomniac was now a large enough company to work on more than one game at a time, and a separate team worked to bring their very first high-definition title to be ready in time for the PS3's launch in November 2006. Resistance Fall of Man would launch day and date with the North American release of the PlayStation 3, and would be a departure for Insomniac, pivoting to a dark, adult sci-fi first-person shooter. With the much publicized release of Resistance, fans were left to wonder if, after 4 games in 4 years, Insomniac was truly done with their trusty Lombax and robot companion. That could not have been further from the truth. Ratchet & Clank was coming to the PlayStation 3. That much was true, but Insomniac believed they had to do something different. After 4 games, the looming threat of franchise fatigue was always there, even with 2006 being the first year since 2002 to not feature a major release in the franchise.
I think for most people, most developers, the temptation would be, we're going to do Ratchet & Clank, except it's going to be on the PlayStation 3. We're going to do a PlayStation 2 game, all of the features, and now we're going to take it to the PlayStation 3.
The first order of business was figuring out what Ratchet & Clank's universe would look like on the brand new console. Not only would the series be entering the high-definition realm for the first time ever, the PS3 allowed for an incredible leap in visual detail, having the capacity to create more complex characters, environments, and objects, while still maintaining the high level of performance that Insomniac held themselves to with their titles. Using their engine for Resistance Fall of Man, Insomniac created a visual diorama of the city of Metropolis, a location that had appeared in a few Ratchet games at that point. The city felt huge and alive, with dozens upon dozens of vehicles zipping in and out of the frame as the camera flew through the landscape that stretched way farther in the distance than ever seen on the PS2. Ratchet & Clank's worlds had always been lively, but never like this, never to this detail. This sequence was shown to audiences at the 2006 Game Developers Conference and was received extremely positively, especially once it reached the internet and that giant blimp with the series logo floated into frame. Ratchet & Clank were back and it was going to look incredible. One caveat, it all had to be made from scratch. While sharing technology with the Resistance Fall of Man team, who themselves were hard at work on a sequel, the team on Ratchet PS3 had a goal. They wanted to create the experience of playing a CGI movie. That meant recreating the titular heroes from scratch in much higher detail. Ratchet was once made up of 110 bones for his original model on PS2. His PS3 refresh would have 120 bones, in his face alone. Coupled with the better visuals, the goal of playing a CGI film also meant that the storytelling department also had to be stepped up as well. With hired writer TJ Fixman, who had worked at Insomniac in QA and design support previously, the team made a plan to fully elaborate on Ratchet & Clank's world. What was the mythology, the history of these planets and characters? And where the heck were all the Lombaxes? With Resistance Fall of Man under their belt, Insomniac would now be firing on all cylinders to bring to release the most epic Ratchet entry yet. The transition to a new console is never an easy one, and while Ratchet PS3, now officially titled Ratchet & Clank Future: Tools of Destruction, had ambitions to include a wide number of planets, more cutscenes, space combat, and multiplayer features, many of that had to be cut. Instead, Insomniac made the decision to trim the game down and focus on what could be done as the first PlayStation 3 title for the series, refocusing on the story, gameplay, and the goal of a cinematic experience. Since they were in a new engine, that meant the scope for the game had to be smaller. What was there was still exceptionally produced. Insomniac was crafting its most visually breathtaking release ever for the time, and one of the best looking PlayStation 3 titles to boot. The team would focus on creating one completely realized level while in pre-production to establish exactly what they would need to do to create the perfect Ratchet experience on the new console. The game would be completed with less content than planned, yes, but what was there greatly outweighed what was left behind. Tools of Destruction would be released in October of 2007, just under a year after the PlayStation 3's launch, to stellar reviews and sales, with some review outlets calling it the best in the series thus far. The game was universally praised for its stunning visuals, gameplay, and new focus on deeper storytelling. As it turned out, Tools of Destruction was the first title of what would come to be known as the Ratchet Future Trilogy. As written by TJ Fixman along with Brian Hastings and Adam Moore, Tools of Destruction told a story intended to explore Ratchet & Clank's origins. While hanging out in Metropolis, the city is brought under attack by an army of aliens commanded by the Napoleon-like Emperor Percival Tachyon, the crown prince of the long-lost race known as the Kragmites. Ratchet & Clank escape his grasp and find themselves on the planet Festoon, the long-abandoned home planet of Ratchet's species, the Lombaxes. At the same time, Clank starts receiving visits and visions by adorable creatures known as the Zoni. Finding and restoring an abandoned Lombax ship called Aphelion, they learned that the Lombaxes were besieged and had to escape Festoon as Tachyon led an attack that wiped out what was left of their civilization. Seeking out more information, the duo meet Talwyn Apogee, a young woman whose father, Max Apogee, was an expert on Lombax technology and may know the secret to where the Lombaxes ended up after Tachyon's attack. The Kragmites and Lombaxes were at war for a long time, and the brutal conflict ended with a Lombax device known as the Dimensionator being used to banish the Kragmites to another realm. One Kragmite egg was left behind, however, and when it was born, the young creature was taken into care by the Lombaxes on Festoon, raising it as their own. That young Kragmite would grow up to become Tachyon, who upon learning what happened to his people, created an army that wiped out the Lombaxes. Those who survived used the Dimensionator to escape as one stayed behind to hide the powerful device from Tachyon. The Lombax who stayed was Ratchet's father, who eventually had to sacrifice his life to save his son and keep the Dimensionator from Tachyon's claws. Ratchet, Clank, Talwyn, and Talwyn's cantankerous robot friends Kronk and Zephyr.
Here's the scoundrel! Pulverize him! Oh, my thruster coils!
Continue to search for clues on the Lombaxes and eventually find the Dimensionator, only for it to be obtained by Tachyon, who uses it to bring the Kragmites back to their own dimension. A fight ensues between the last Kragmite and Lombax, with the Dimensionator getting damaged, causing a black hole that sucks Tachyon away for good, ruining the device in the process. With the Kragmites defeated, Ratchet and Clank return to the Apogee space station only for the Zoni to make themselves known to everyone, whisking Clank away to somewhere unknown, stating he has a greater purpose to fulfill. The story ends on a cliffhanger with Ratchet standing in disbelief with his best friend vanished.
Let him go!
It is time to understand your purpose. It is time to come with us.
Yes, time to come with you.
Clank!
While the cliffhanger ending was divisive, the story of Tools of Destruction had done its job, unifying the lore of the Ratchet & Clank universe across its mediums and set the stage for future stories to come while making Ratchet more relatable to players as he struggled to come to terms with his past. Tools of Destruction also made for a wonderful jumping off point for the franchise on the PS3. The worlds were bigger with larger enemies to defeat, the weapons delivered visual spectacles not seen on the PS2, and Insomniac was finally able to implement previous weapon and gadget concepts like the Groovatron, a disco ball that made enemies do unique dances that left them open to attack. It quickly became a fan favorite. Another plus of the new platform was the ability to even give the weapons themselves personality. Enter Mr. Zircon, an evolution of the bots that provided shooting support in Deadlocked, was now a trash-talking comedic robot who would still provide support in combat, but would make fun of enemies the entire time, and even Ratchet himself, speaking in the third person.
Mr. Zircon is looking to kill you.
Leaning into the comedy and spectacle of combat helped define Ratchet & Clank in its evolution onto a new platform. With Tools of Destruction complete in release, it was time to continue the story with a sequel, but this time it would take more than just a year to complete. Because of this, Insomniac had the opportunity to make a smaller scale title to come out in between Tools of Destruction and the next full-length Ratchet title. Not only would it be smaller, but it would be a downloadable title. Downloadable content, or DLC, was fairly new for the game industry at the time, so it was a completely new experience for the team at Insomniac. What would the game be? Something more experimental? A completely different game style? Maybe a space combat-based game inspired by the cut content from Tools of Destruction? Or maybe they should create a smaller story to address that divisive cliffhanger. Eventually, that last idea was chosen, and the downloadable, smaller second entry in the Future trilogy was born, the delightfully titled Ratchet & Clank Future Quest for Booty. Since the next big Ratchet game was in pre-production, Quest for Booty was developed by a smaller team primarily using assets created already for the Ratchet series. It also led to the opportunity to expand on the space pirates featured originally in Tools of Destruction. With Clank abducted, new gameplay styles were experimented on with Ratchet's trusty wrench, gaining new abilities like tethering platforms to the ground and puzzle platforming segments. Along with that, Quest for Booty also made advances in the style of storytelling of the Ratchet series, focusing more on dialogue trees akin to adventure and RPG games when conversing with the citizens of the game's primary location, Hulafar Island.
Crotchetizers. Well, now, I don't suppose there's much demand for that particular item.
To address Tools of Destruction's cliffhanger, the story follows Ratchet and Talwyn as they investigate Clank's disappearance at the hands of the Zoni. Their search leads them to the Obsidian Eye, a powerful telescope located on Hulafar Island that could potentially help them find where the little robot has gone. After defending Hulafar from space pirates and the ghastly ghost of Captain Darkwater, Ratchet is able to gaze into the Obsidian Eye and see Clank suspended in a room full of light while the Zoni float around him. Something seems to be wrong with the robot, as the Zoni claim the Doctor was coming to fix him. The door behind them opens to reveal none other than Dr. Nefarious, now off the asteroid yelling for his butler Lawrence as the eye shuts down after giving Ratchet coordinates that may help him rescue Clank. Quest for Booty sold well and was well received when it arrived digitally on the PlayStation Store in 2008, though it did suffer a bit lower review scores-wise due to negatives like the lack of weapon upgrades along with its shorter length. The gameplay experimentation, however, was praised, along with fans finally being satisfied on where exactly Clank had been spirited away to. The return of fan-favorite Dr. Nefarious was exciting as well, seeing him appear in HD for the first time. The development and release of the game went relatively smoothly and was a fun title for Insomniac to put together, even though it brushed against the production of the next major title, with the only controversy arriving unexpectedly when the game featured the head of Pirate Slag singing a bit of the song I'm a Little Teapot.
A recitation of the fabled Song of the Dead shall open the way.
I'm a little teapot, short and stout. Here is me handle, here is me spout.
The team assumed the song was in the public domain and used a few verses in Quest for Booty as a small joke, only to learn that the song was absolutely not available for free use, leading to lawyers contacting the game company in what amusingly became known as Teapot Gate.
I thought it would be funny if the pirate head just sang I'm a little teapot in order to open one of the doors. It was just one of those dumb, funny jokes that you'd throw in without thinking a lot about it. It turns out someone actually owns the rights to I'm a little teapot, and that person has lawyers.
The issue was settled out of court. Now, after Quest for Booty was released, and with Insomniac officially comfortable with the Ratchet franchise on the PlayStation 3, it was time to go big. Like, biggest PS3 game they've ever made big. Potential finale of the Ratchet & Clank series as a whole big. After so much content was cut from Tools of Destruction, and with the prospects of the conclusion to the future trilogy as a potential grand finale for the series as a whole, everything went into the next game, Ratchet & Clank Future: A Crack in Time. For the first time in the series, Insomniac included full space exploration, allowing Ratchet to use Aphelion to travel from planet to planet in open space, doing side quests, getting into some intergalactic combat, and even exploring small spherical worlds, returning from all the way back and going commando. Whereas Tools of Destruction had the aim to feel like you were playing a cinematic CGI film, A Crack in Time took that concept and really fully realized it, telling an engrossing story in parallel as, for the first time, Ratchet and Clank were separated. After learning Clank's sort of whereabouts, Ratchet sets out on a journey to find his friend, naturally with Captain Quark in tow. He happens upon a species of creatures known as the Fongoids, who seem to have a connection with time anomalies that are appearing throughout the galaxy. At the same time, Clank awakens to find himself on the Great Clock, a massive device located at the exact center of the universe.
Give or take 50 feet.
The Great Clock maintains time in the universe after an incident where the Fongoids were given the power to manipulate time, only to abuse its power, causing a tear in the space-time continuum. Now the Great Clock keeps everything in check, holding it all together. Clank's origins are fully revealed as well, as he learns he is the son of Orvis, the original caretaker of the clock, delightfully voiced by Mario himself, Charles Martinet. Orvis went missing, however, and the clock fell into the hands of Dr. Nefarious, leaving Clank and Orvis's assistant Sigmund to try to stop Nefarious and clean up his mess. Nefarious intends to use the clock as a time machine, a purpose it isn't built for beyond traveling maybe just a few minutes, to make himself supreme ruler of the universe. Naturally. The game's story plays out in parallel, as Ratchet searches for Clank and Clank works to take back the Great Clock. Eventually, Ratchet meets up with an actual fellow surviving Lombax, an imposing man named Alistair Azimuth. It turns out that Azimuth was best friends with Ratchet's father, now revealed to be named Caden. However, Azimuth was exiled from the Lombaxes when they escaped the Kragmite's wrath, as Azimuth was tricked into trusting Tachyon when he returned to the Lombaxes as an adult, touting advanced technology. Tachyon used his sway with Azimuth to form his army to wipe out the species for good. Azimuth attempted to right his wrongs when the attack finally came, and tried to go back to Festoon to save the Lombaxes there, including Ratchet's mother. Unfortunately, he was too late, and she, along with the other Lombaxes hiding, were already killed. As punishment for his crimes and leading Tachyon to their destruction, Azimuth was left behind while the remaining Lombaxes escaped to another dimension. As Ratchet and Clank eventually reconnect, Clank advises in not using the Great Clock as a time machine, as Azimuth wants to do just that to turn back time and save the Lombaxes from his own mistakes. Ratchet and Clank put a stop to Dr. Nefarious' plans and destroy his nearby station, seemingly destroying the mad robot for good. However, Azimuth is still determined to use the clock to turn back time. When Ratchet denies him, Azimuth retaliates and actually kills Ratchet. On screen, kills him, and he falls to his death. Out of choices in remembering Orvis's words, Clank uses the Great Clock to turn back time just enough to stop Azimuth from murdering Ratchet. This leads to an epic fight on the Great Clock as Azimuth tries to turn back time, claiming he can kill Ratchet now and save him in the past. After an arduous fight, Ratchet is able to get Azimuth to see the error of his ways. However, the clock is falling apart, and as a last-ditch effort, Azimuth sacrifices his life to stop the clock's and the universe's destruction. In the aftermath, Clank determines that Sigmund is truly right for the role as caretaker of the clock and leaves with Ratchet, ready for more adventures.
And remember, the universe has a wonderful sense of humor. The trick is learning how to take a joke.
It was quite the epic conclusion to this trilogy, and no cliffhanger this time. Nefarious was defeated, the clock restored, and while Ratchet had not found the lost Lombaxes, the answers to his and Clank's pasts were finally answered. All in all, considered a great ending. Critics and players agreed as A Crack in Time was released in 2009 to critical acclaim and again strong sales for the series, bringing in new fun aspects like time travel, visiting planets in the past and present. Unlike entries like Deadlock, A Crack in Time featured everything that worked about Ratchet and Clank as a series, and then some with the return of smaller planets, along with the addition of space exploration, side quests, new open battlefield levels, the addition of the zippy hover boots to allow Ratchet faster movement, and expanded Clank gameplay as he used a time scepter to solve various intricate puzzles in the Great Clock, adding more variety to the series' gameplay formula. All this diversity of gameplay formed a cohesive whole, and A Crack in Time was the total package. Insomniac threw everything they had into the game, and many considered it one of the best in the series. The future trilogy set out to accomplish a lot. While Ratchet and Clank as a series was already successful, Insomniac's ambition to elevate the series on the new console was, as evidenced by all three titles' reception, a resounding success. Ratchet and Clank firmly and confidently made the jump to high definition, crafting a world that was more intricate than ever, more detailed, more story-driven. Along with that, Insomniac had shifted to more timeless storytelling, hoping for these more modern games to stand the test of time compared to the earlier PS2 titles, which had more specific of the time pop culture references. After now 7 games in the main series, Ratchet and Clank had found ways to continue to stay fresh with each entry, solidifying the franchise even more as a force to be reckoned with delightful characters, fantastic worlds, over-the-top weapons, and surprisingly emotional storytelling. So that was it. Insomniac put a bow on the Ratchet and Clank series and it was time to move on to other things. Until it wasn't. While post A Crack in Time saw the release of a short comic series taking place after the game, the plan was for the story to truly conclude here. However, after the strong reception and sales, Sony wanted more. And, with Insomniac's staff growing larger and larger with each game release, not only was it time for the Ratchet and Clank series to expand, but the company itself would too. Maybe, perhaps, to an entirely new side of the country. What was once a small studio of just a few developers had grown into an enormous independent company that churned out hit after hit with over 170 people employed. With the growth of the company, Insomniac found that they were able to develop 2 titles at once, entering the PS3 era with both Ratchet and Clank continuing along with new franchise Resistance. However, with Insomniac located on the west coast of the United States, in Burbank, California, they sought to find a way to recruit potential developers on the East Coast without becoming too big to handle. Thus, in 2008, in the midst of the development of Resistance 2 and Ratchet & Clank Future: A Crack in Time, a decision was made. Insomniac Games would be opening a second studio. The location? North Carolina. The Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina was already known for its support of tech companies, not to mention its colleges like Duke University, and its prime location on the East Coast made for the right candidate for Insomniac's second studio, also to be simply known as Insomniac Games. Chad Dezern, an art director at Insomniac, would be promoted to studio director and move out to the new studio, while Sean McCabe, who along with Chad was finishing up work on Resistance 2, would serve as production director. Insomniac's Burbank office would remain the larger of the two, with a team of 25 to 30 designers and artists working in North Carolina to develop one title at a time, as well as receiving support from Burbank and vice versa. The idea was to maintain a feeling of a small studio within Insomniac at large, creating new AAA game titles and not just being a support studio. The new location would open early the next year, in January 2009. At the conclusion of Ratchet & Clank Future: A Crack in Time, Insomniac believed themselves to be done with the Lombax and Robot. However, when the game released to such critical and commercial success, Sony was quick to request for a new Ratchet title to be developed. While development in Burbank would continue with the Resistance franchise, along with new ventures like Outer Knots for mobile devices and Fuse for both the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, the new team in Durham would be tasked with developing the next Ratchet title. With 3 story-based games released in the last 3 years, however, in order to keep the franchise fresh after now 7 entries, it was time to experiment. The adapt or die mentality was back more than ever. Various ideas were thrown around to shake up the Ratchet & Clank formula, but one that really stood out to the new team was cooperative play. The series had previously dabbled in co-op action with Ratchet Deadlocked on the PlayStation 2, but the new idea here was more ambitious. A full-length Ratchet & Clank adventure with up to 4 players at once. With this choice, a lot would have to be modified to make this concept work. For one, with 4 characters on screen at once, a new camera system that was more overhead would have to be implemented, opting to avoid a split-screen setup like in Deadlocked. Because of the camera being pulled farther back, the art direction and design of the Ratchet universe would see its first truly major overhaul. Leaning into a more cartoony aesthetic than past games, Ratchet's head was made larger, Clank was made bigger, now being about half Ratchet's height, Quark's proportions would be adjusted, and Nefarious would be made smaller, more comparable to Ratchet's height instead of being typically double his size. Oh, did I mention Dr. Nefarious? Well, after collapsing on his own space station right before it exploded in a spectacular fashion, the iconic villain was dead. Super dead. Well, until he wasn't.
Never ring a bell if there's even a slight chance that the publisher might want it unrung. Chad Dezern and Sean McCabe pitched the new Ratchet game to Sony, and one key piece of feedback they received was to make Dr. Nefarious a playable character. We just flew that dude into a space station, and Greg Phillips from Sony was like, maybe it was just a flesh wound?
Nefarious was a fan favorite and Sony wanted him back, so Insomniac had to find a way to un-annihilate him. Nefarious' fate was retconned into Lawrence teleporting his unconscious body off the station before it exploded, ensuring his survival. Simple enough. With finding a concept that would fit a game involving 4-player co-op, along with giving a logical reason as to why Nefarious would be working with his 3 thorns in his metallic side, Insomniac would revisit the one-planet concept first explored in the shelved Ratchet & Clank Nexus, before it was turned into Ratchet Deadlocked, stranding their heroes and villain on one planet for the primary duration of the game and forcing them to work together was the most logical way to bring the gameplay and story concepts together. The new title was given the name Ratchet & Clank All for One, in reference to its emphasis on 4-player cooperative gameplay. Not as much of an innuendo as previous game titles, though it's been noted other titles that were denied by Sony were 4-play, Bros Before Foes, and multiple organisms. Yeah. The story goes that after Captain Quark has become the new galactic president,
she was taking a memo!
Nefarious hatches a scheme to ruin his tenure in office by unleashing a monster upon the city of Luminopolis. However, this creature brings to attention a creature collector machine named Ephemeris, who captures the creature along with Ratchet and company in tow. The 4 end up on the planet Magnus, and, with the help of a little alien girl named Susie, they have to work together to get back home and destroy Ephemeris in the process. The group soon finds out that a creature known as the Loki Master is in control of the Ephemeris, and is taking control of an innocent creature known as Mr. Dinkles to stop Ratchet and friends from destroying it. They also meet Dr. Frumpus Croyd, who aids in their defeat of the Loki Master along with his old friend Nevo Binkelmeyer. Now, with the group in control of Ephemeris, they use the machine to return back to Luminopolis for the crisis averted. The story was definitely more slight and straightforward than previous Ratchet titles, but then the focus was less on cinematic storytelling a la the Future trilogy and more on providing new new, unique gameplay for the series, along with a stronger family-friendly focus. And this spin-off experiment largely worked. The game sold well, over 1 million copies when it released in 2011 for the PlayStation 3, and it was also critically well received, though it held the lowest scores of the Ratchet series thus far. The co-op gameplay variety was praised, though criticisms were directed at the more family-friendly tone of the story, along with issues with glitches, awkward partner AI, and easy puzzles. Not exactly a home run for Insomniac, but they pressed onward, committed to experimenting even further with the Ratchet formula. It was notable as well that All For One marked the series' first foray into 3D, with the title being the first in the series to be compatible with the then popular 3D television sets. The year 2012 was the 10th anniversary for Ratchet & Clank as a series, an incredible milestone, especially for a game franchise with now 10 titles, including portable spin-offs, under its tricked-out belt. 2 new game releases would be put out for the 10th anniversary, with the first being the next title from Insomniac's North Carolina studio, Ratchet & Clank Full Frontal Assault. Taking direct influence from the broader battle environments created in A Crack in Time, along with Ratchet's then new ability to speed around on a pair of hover boots, a new gameplay style for the series was crafted based in the tower defense genre, where a player has a base that has to be upgraded with various defensive forces in order to protect it from oncoming assaults of enemies. While this gameplay concept wasn't exactly new for Insomniac, as it was reminiscent of Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal's popular Siege multiplayer mode, centering a whole game around tower defense was entirely new. Full Frontal Assault would also mark the first time Ratchet & Clank would appear on Sony's newest handheld and PlayStation Portable successor, the underrated PlayStation Vita. Being part of Sony's cross-buy program, if consumers purchased Full Frontal Assault for the PlayStation 3, they'd also receive a free digital copy of the game for the Vita. Moment-to-moment gameplay would see return to the typical third-person perspective of previous Ratchet titles, though co-op play would still be featured for up to 2 players. While releasing to mark a celebration of the series' 10th anniversary, Full Frontal Assault was built as a smaller game at a lower price point, consisting of just 5 battlefield levels across 3 different planets. Players would zip around these environments as Ratchet, collecting bolts and weaponry to defend a central base held by the Q-Force, made up of Ratchet, Clank, and Captain Quark. Claiming different areas of the map, players would then have to prep their own camp with turrets, shields, and other means of defense before a final assault of robotic enemies and the like would come to take down the base. If this final force was fended off, the level would be complete and the cycle would start anew on a different battlefield. While a smaller game in comparison to previous Ratchet titles, Full Frontal Assault did feature a story, telling a simple tale of a Quark fanboy, previously seen in Going Commando,
Cool. Mwah. I'm taking the captain home before the humidity gets to him.
feeling that the hero had failed and ended up as a disappointment to his fanbase. The ex-fanboy named Stuart Zergo then pledges to defeat Quark, proving how pathetic he really was to the galaxy. I mean, while Stuart wasn't wrong, he enacts his plan by attempting to take out planetary defense centers across the galaxy, so Ratchet and the Q-Force have to put a stop to it. Eventually, the group finally discovers Stuart's location and defeats him, making the galaxy safe again for everyone. A straightforward narrative that unfortunately lacked the solid buddy cop dynamic of previous titles. The concept and gameplay for Full Frontal Assault was a distinct spin on the Ratchet formula, but the game would prove to be unfortunately the weakest received entry yet. While reviews weren't bad per se, they all tended to be more mixed than anything. The innovation of gameplay was praised overall, but the single-player gameplay was criticized as being lackluster on its own, and not particularly interesting. It seemed to many like a dilution of the franchise, with it losing its distinct qualities that made it interesting and just feeling like an unremarkable third-person shooter. The multiplayer was praised as much more enjoyable and where the game really stood out, but it wasn't enough to save the overall reception. The vision was there, just a lot of missed potential with fully utilizing tower defense as a genre within the Ratchet framework. The Vita version was also criticized for having various technical issues and long load times. It didn't help either that the Vita version was delayed past the PS3 release and was released a few months later in 2013 instead of in 2012 at the same time as the home console version. Now, the other title released in 2012 for the 10th anniversary was the Ratchet & Clank Collection for the PlayStation 3. Following the trend of remastering and re-releasing PlayStation 2 titles on the PS3 like the Sly Collection and God of War Collection, the Ratchet & Clank Collection took the series' original 3 games, Ratchet & Clank, Going Commando, and Up Your Arsenal, and made them playable on the HD console with newly remastered widescreen visuals so players could relive the original classic entries in the series. The collection would not be developed by Insomniac, however. Instead, it would be outsourced to developer Idle Minds, known for working on such games as Pain, Madagascar Escape to Africa, and Neopets The Darkest Fairy. Not only would the original 3 Ratchet games be playable in high definition, they'd also be made compatible to play on 3D TVs, albeit at a lower frame rate. Up Your Arsenal Arsenal's multiplayer was also included, though only playable offline. The collection would also see a release on the PlayStation Vita as a downloadable title. Insomniac Games held up remarkably well, and reviews and sales were universally solid for the collection. Ratchet & Clank had a long legacy in its 10 years of existence, and seeing where it all began served as a satisfying way to celebrate its anniversary. Ratchet Deadlock would not be included in the initial collection, but would later be added as a downloadable title on the PlayStation Network, along with being given free to those who had purchased the PS3 version of Full Frontal Assault as an apology for the delay of the Vita version of the game. All for One and Full Frontal Assault were major experiments for the Ratchet & Clank series and the new team in North Carolina, and it showed that these beloved characters could still find ways to reinvent themselves, even if results would vary. The next game in the series, releasing just a year after Full Frontal Assault in 2013, would see a return to the Ratchet & Clank gameplay beloved by fans around the world. However, while the return to the classic gameplay was a welcome one, it would still just be a half step instead of the full leap back into the big, epic adventures last seen in A Crack in Time. Ratchet & Clank Into the Nexus, not to be confused with the cancelled Ratchet & Clank Nexus project, would serve as an epilogue to the future trilogy of games and for the Ratchet series as a whole on the PlayStation 3. Built as a smaller game, Into the Nexus was designed to bring back the classic Ratchet gameplay, but with new ways of traversal along with a moodier, somewhat spookier tone, as the duo traversed a section of the galaxy that was said to be haunted. The game's story begins with Ratchet & Clank, along with Kronk and Zephyr, piloting a large prison ship as they transport criminal Vendra Prague to a detention center. During their journey, they awaken Vendra from cryosleep just as the ship's gravity systems fail, allowing her to wreak havoc. They eventually restrain Vendra, only for her giant twin brother, Neftin Prague, to arrive and free her. Explosives on the prison ship are detonated, and Ratchet and Clank only just escape, though Kronk and Zephyr are sadly lost in the chaos and go down with the ship. Landing on a planet in the haunted section of the galaxy, Ratchet contacts Talwyn to inform her of her robot's friend's demises. She pleads for Ratchet to return to her so she doesn't lose anyone else.
Clank and I are going to stop them before they hurt anyone else.
Listen to me. Come back to Meridian City.
Tal...
Please. You and Clank. You're all I have left now.
But they vow to recapture the Prague twins before they can do more harm. While exploring the planet Yarrick, Ratchet and Clank soon find that the area isn't really haunted, but is instead the homes of spirit-like creatures called Nethers, who have arrived in their dimension through various Nether rifts. They also learn that Vendra and Neftin had built their own version of the Dimensionator to bring the Nethers over to this galaxy, hoping that the Nether leader, known as Mr. I, would help reunite them with their race, not unlike Ratchet's search for the Lombaxes. Unfortunately, however, Mr. I instead imprisons Vendra in the Netherverse, an in-between dimensional world. Ratchet and Clank strike a deal with Neftin. If they help free Vendra by retrieving the original Dimensionator, the twins have to turn themselves in. As they obtain the original device, Mr. I attacks, leading to Ratchet fighting the Nether leader while Clank traverses the Netherverse to find and free Vendra. They both succeed. Ratchet defeats Mr. I, and with Clank saving Vendra, the group works together to send the Nethers back to their own dimension permanently. In the ensuing chaos, the Dimensionator is broken. Clank expresses regret with Ratchet unable to use the device to find the Lombaxes, but Ratchet admits that he's finally accepted his lot in life and is happy with the family he has now in Clank and Talwyn. The duo depart, only for Clank to grab the Dimensionator himself when no one's looking. Into the Nexus was well received upon its release, selling well and reviewing better than All for One and Full Frontal Assault, though still lower than previous Ratchet titles like the Future Trilogy. While audiences praised the return to form for the gameplay, eschewing the gimmicky mechanics of previous titles, critics were more lukewarm on the shorter length of the game. Consisting of just 4 planets, Into the Nexus was about half as long as the typical Ratchet and Clank adventure, and the cheaper price point upon release reflected that, throwing in a free digital code for Quest for Booty as well to sweeten the deal. The game was short, yes, but the story was very well received, serving as a lovely coda to the epic story that concluded in A Crack in Time, while leaving things open to continue down the line. Also praised was the gameplay variety, as solo Clank missions saw return in charming gravity-switching side-scrolling segments as the little robot traversed the Netherverse, while Ratchet received new tools to move around environments, like new gravity-manipulating puzzles along with more open environments to travel around using a jetpack. So while things weren't universally positive, Into the Nexus was largely seen as a step in the right direction for the Ratchet and Clank series. A Vita port was also considered for the game, but after the struggles with putting Full Frontal Assault on the platform, the idea was quickly abandoned. There was also the case of the new PlayStation 4 console arriving on store shelves that same year in 2013. Insomniac considered a port to the new system for Into the Nexus, as the game's performance on the PS3 with frame rate was inconsistent at best, a lower watermark for a series known for silky smooth gameplay. Unfortunately, however, Insomniac's engine for the PS3 didn't translate cleanly to the new Sony console. If Insomniac was to put a Ratchet title on the PS4, it would have to be something new. Well, sort of new. Ratchet & Clank's time on the PlayStation 3 was one of peaks and valleys. With 6 titles in total released, 2 more than when the series was on the PlayStation 2, there was a lot of content to go around, and to avoid franchise fatigue, a lot of experimentation. Some paid off better than others, but at this point, it was typical Insomniac to take their existing characters and try new things with them and see what worked. While some titles were less well received than normal, Insomniac and its new studio in North Carolina continued the storied legacy of the franchise and took it in new exciting directions, from strong cinematic storytelling to finding new cooperative ways of play. In the end, what worked all came down to its characters. Ratchet & Clank's friendship was the anchor for every entry in the series, and the more focus placed on the beloved duo, it seemed the better the game. After now over 10 years of Ratchet & Clank, Insomniac now knew what worked and what didn't, and still strived to take these beloved characters to interesting new places in both gameplay and story. Adapt or die was the mantra, and this era of Ratchet & Clank was emblematic of that. Insomniac embraced the unknown no matter what it brought, while trying to evolve and remembering what made their games so great. Experimentation with something so beloved can be scary, but it was essential to maintain a series as long-running as Ratchet & Clank. And speaking of the unknown, it was time for Ratchet & Clank to embrace a new medium entirely. Hollywood was knocking, and the Lombax and Robot were not only heading towards a new console, but they were going to the big screen. In 2018, Insomniac and Ratchet & Clank veterans Brian Allgeier and TJ Fixman gave a talk at the Game Developers Conference, reflecting on the then 15 years of the franchise. A key point they made was about sticking to the franchise DNA of Ratchet & Clank, the important aspects that created a successful entry, such as A Crack in Time, or one that falls short, such as Deadlocked. The points were these: a buddy story with heart, imaginative and strategic weapons, planetary exploration, gadgets, Captain Quark, stylized, richly detailed and vibrant visuals, Douglas Adams-inspired humor, and a balance of shooting and platforming. The Ratchet & Clank series could twist and turn into different gameplay styles, even different formats, but if these major points all were hit by the studio, then the game was sure to be a success. Now, post Into the Nexus, Ratchet & Clank were about to make the jump to 2 new platforms. The first, the brand new PlayStation 4, had arrived, allowing Insomniac the ability to push their CGI film-like visuals of the franchise to even further heights. Since the beginning, Ratchet & Clank featured a rich world and characters, something with the potential to make the leap to, say, a theatrical franchise. Insomniac and Sony had been approached by multiple producers over the years, but when they were finally approached by Rainmaker Entertainment, then known for their work on such CGI projects as Reboot in the 1990s, producing multiple direct-to-video films based on the Barbie doll line, and the sci-fi theatrical film Escape from Planet Earth, a deal was finally reached. With support from Insomniac and PlayStation, Ratchet & Clank would be making the jump to the big screen. It would be a partnership between the two companies. Insomniac would aid Rainmaker Entertainment in pre-visualization for the film, providing assets like character models and environments for the animation studio to then build off of to create an updated look for the film that, while new, still was representative of the beloved game franchise as a whole. Trying to transition to the film world authentically from the games, TJ Fixman, writer for the series since Tools of Destruction in 2007, provided the original draft for the script. The Ratchet & Clank movie would be a new-ish story, a sort of reboot reimagining of the first game's tale. Another sigh of relief for fans, the core cast of James Arnold Taylor as Ratchet, David Kay as Clank, and Jim Ward as Captain Quark would be retained and not be replaced with celebrity voices. The supporting cast, however, would be another story. At the same time, a brand new Ratchet title was put into development for the PlayStation 4, the franchise's first entry on the platform. Instead of continuing where Into the Nexus left off, the game would follow the movie and reimagine the first story in the series for the new console. Fixman would again serve as writer, coordinating with the feature film. Leading to the PS4, the game would be developed between Insomniac's North Carolina studio along with its original studio in Burbank, with North Carolina's Chad Dezern and Sean McCabe directing the project along with Brian Allgeier in California. The game wouldn't be a simple port or remake of the original 2002 PS2 game. It would be a from-the-ground-up reimagining, featuring similar story beats and locations as the original, while also tying into the film, even using clips from it to move the story along. Development on the game went relatively smoothly and was primed and ready as another great entry in the Ratchet & Clank franchise. Back in Hollywood, it was becoming another story entirely. By nature, Hollywood movie production is an ever-evolving process. Hundreds upon hundreds of scripts are sold to studios every year, and the vast majority are never actually produced. Those that are routinely rewritten and redone by new writers, notes from executives, all kinds of competing forces working, ideally, to bring out the best product to create a work of art that... just kidding. Really, these changes are made in the name of money. Hollywood's a business. It's quite literally show business. They have to have a script they think will sell well to audiences. So it was natural for changes to the Ratchet & Clank movie to be made along the way. The film was officially announced to the public in April of 2013 with a fun teaser written by Fixman featuring Ratchet, Clank, and Quark discussing the movie, announcing a release date of 2015 in theaters. The teaser set an exciting precedent for the film, retaining the game's signature humor that was always a little off-kilter and goofy. Behind the scenes, however, things were already changing. The movie project had brought on Kevin Munro, known for the animated Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie from 2007, to direct the film. Munro would take control of the script and rewrite it. While the basic premise stayed the same, many changes were made. Characters were modified or cut, game references to things like the Bio-Obliterator were removed, and most significantly, the film's sense of humor shifted from one reminiscent of the games to something more family audience friendly, with snippy jokes and references typical of other family fare of the time. The bland, forgettable kind. On the game side, developing a story to tie into a film with a script that was still changing was a small problem, to put it mildly. TJ Fixman made the suggestion to have the game's version of the story be told from the perspective of Quark himself, not only allowing for any inconsistencies between the movie and film to be written off as Quark himself editorializing, but also potentially placing the reimagining of the original game's events outside of the Ratchet canon and lore at large if the movie's story were not to continue past the first film. It could just be a Quark retelling. So less a reboot, more a reimagining. Back on the movie side of things, it was getting a little, well, stressful. The original draft was fading away as Kevin Munro's vision took over. Not exactly atypical for movie development, but it was becoming less and less in line with the game universe.
It was a simple difference of opinion. The director and I agreed on a lot of things, but there were just as many things we didn't see eye to eye on. This happens on pretty much every project in development, so it's very normal. No one is ever right or wrong. I didn't create the Ratchet franchise, so I certainly have no hold or authority over its story, characters, or tone. And Kevin deserved to have his handcuffs taken off so he could create his own unique vision for the movie universe.
TJ Fixman would leave the Ratchet & Clank movie project somewhere around 2013 and 2014. The final script would be rewritten and reworked by Kevin Munro along with Jerry Swallow, a writer known for Ice Age 2, The Meltdown, and Walking with Dinosaurs 3D. Munro would maintain his status as director with Jerrica Clayland as co-director. The film's budget was small for a major CGI release, in the end costing $20 million to make, with Rainmaker Entertainment as the chief financier, along with the help from Blockade Entertainment, Sony under the PlayStation Originals label, CNHK Media China, and the Cinema Management Group. As is common with animated Hollywood films, the cast of the film would mostly consist of celebrities, featuring Paul Giamatti as Chairman Drek, replacing Kevin Michael Richardson from the original game, along with John Goodman, Bella Thorne, Rosario Dawson, and Sylvester Stallone filling out the rest of the cast, playing new original characters for the film. The story would also integrate a new origin for series favorite Dr. Nefarious, voiced again by Armin Shimmerman. The rest of the voice cast would be filled out primarily with Canadian voice talent. With the aforementioned script changes, in order to maintain some parity between the movie and the game, 4 primary planetary settings were selected that would appear in both: Ratchet's home, Veldin, Drek's Warbot factory, Kurwan, and finally Drek's deplanetizer weapon. Beyond that, for the game, the rest of the locations would be filled out with returning planets and characters from the original, such as Blackwater City and the resort on Poketaru. With the addition of Quark's unreliable narration, the video game, now officially known simply as Ratchet & Clank, was free to simply be a fun remake of the original game with cutscene clips from the film included to keep the two tied together. While both were set for release at some point in 2015, eventually the film settled on a release date in April 2016, so the game followed suit. Even with the delay, some aspects of the game had to be cut down or removed entirely. While the original goal was being achieved, taking the original 2002 game and updating it with all the lessons Insomniac had learned over the years, little things like extra animation and dialogue conversations, along with small touches like seamless transitions from a level to Ratchet's ship, had to be left out. Thankfully, recreating content from the original game proved not so difficult as, while the original PS2 source code could not be accessed with Insomniac's PS4 engine, the work developer Idle Minds had done on the HD upgrade of the original games with the Ratchet & Clank collection on the PS3 was usable as reference for bringing the old levels to brand new PS4-powered life. While aspects from the original game were removed, the PS4 reimagining ended up with some new planets, returning planets that featured major overhauls like the introduction of an open hover pack exploration area on one, and new Clank in space combat gameplay. Not bad at all.
A compressed schedule, a new platform, and our first cross-studio collaboration, any single one of these challenges suggests we were in for a challenging production, and yet Ratchet & Clank PS4 turned out to be among the smoothest productions in Insomniac history. Eerily smooth. We still expect to wake up and discover that it was a dream.
Throughout all of this, after rewrites and constant changes with the script, the final story was ironed out for the movie, and thus the game. Retelling the events of the original title, Ratchet & Clank, the movie, told the story of an orphan Lombax, Ratchet, who discovers a factory defect robot, Clank, when the bot crash lands near the mechanic shop where Ratchet works. Instead of a thrill seeker with a bit of an edge, Ratchet is now more earnest and naive, hoping to one day find glory in becoming a galactic ranger. A team of galaxy-protecting officers led by Ratchet's favorite superhero, Captain Quark. Ratchet gets his chance of glory when, once Clank tells Ratchet of evil Chairman Drekk's plans to destroy worlds with his deplanetizer, they head to the Galactic Ranger HQ to seek help, actually saving the Rangers in the process. This heroic act is caught on camera, and Quark, after previously denying Ratchet entry into the Rangers,
But if you have heart, then you have what it takes. You don't have what it takes.
But I have heart.
is forced to add them to the group as a captive audience looks on. Ratchet quickly rises to stardom, much to Quark's chagrin, as he and the Rangers work to stop Drekk's evil plan. A new addition to the story is Dr. Nefarious, still an organic, squishy lifeform in the game and film, who works to create various weapons and gadgets for Drekk and his Blarg army. Learning that the next planet to be destroyed is the small world of Novalis, the Rangers assault Drekk's deplanetizer. Quark, however, betrays the Rangers, as Drekk tempts him into working for him by exploiting his jealousy of Ratchet & Clank's newfound fame. Due to Quark's treachery, the Rangers fail and Novalis is destroyed, though thankfully having been evacuated in time. Drekk has won, though his plans face a curveball with the sudden betrayal by Dr. Nefarious as he turns Drekk into a sheep with the Sheepinator and ejects him to the still-in-progress new Blargian planet Cortu. Ratchet, after the destruction of Novalis, decides to quit the Rangers and returns home. However, he's convinced to return by Clank and the Galactic Ranger Korra after learning that Nefarious intends to use the deplanetizer to destroy the planet Umbris, which has an unstable core that will knock out many nearby planets upon its destruction. The team leads a final assault on the deplanetizer, diverting its course and destroying the in-progress Cortu with Drekk still on it. Quark sees the errors of his ways and helps Ratchet and Clank defeat Nefarious, seemingly for good. The Rangers return to their base with the galaxy celebrating their success. Quark begins an apology tour, Ratchet and Clank prep for new adventures, and in a mid-credit scene, Nefarious appears in the wreckage of the deplanetizer in a new, robotic form, vowing vengeance on the Galactic Rangers and Quark. The game too followed this plot, along with the added planets and a framing device of Quark actually serving prison time for his transgressions, as he regales the story from his perspective to a fellow inmate. The movie and the game were now both complete, so they just had to be released. So, what happened? Upon its release in April of 2016, it should come as no surprise at this point that Ratchet & Clank's first PS4 adventure would be an immediate success. However, it was actually even more than that. Not only was it positively reviewed by critics for its gorgeous graphics, tight gameplay, and solid length after the short playtime of Into the Nexus, but the new game became the fastest-selling Ratchet title in the series' history, noted as a big surprise sales-wise by analysts, who expected strong sales but not this strong. The game sold similarly to the series' highs of the PS2 era, quickly becoming a bestseller for the PlayStation 4 overall. Now, the movie, on the other hand, yeah, turns out when you remove what makes Ratchet & Clank so special, the dynamic between the two characters and its inspired sense of humor, you get a film that feels remarkably similar to, well, everything. With no way to really make a mark for itself as a unique story in the animated film landscape, Ratchet & Clank opened to bad reviews, scoring a 29 out of 100 on Metacritic. This poor reception of the story also carried over into the game, with fans feeling like the distinct personality of the Ratchet & Clank series had been sanded down into something less interesting and generic. At least the game had its fantastic tried and true gameplay to fall back on. The movie, well, bombed. Hard. With marketing, while online videos catered to the game community were received with tons of views, that's not exactly reaching out to a wide audience. The producers on the film hoped the built-in fans of the Ratchet & Clank universe would raise the film to box office success, hoping to at least match what Rainmaker's previous theatrical effort, Escape from Planet Earth, had earned, which was just over $70 million. With a budget of just $20 million, Ratchet & Clank's path to making money wasn't a difficult one, but with a severe lack of marketing for general audiences, along with poor reviews, the film would bomb at the box office, only making $8.8 million total in North America, with a worldwide total of just a little over $14 million by the end of its theatrical run. The consequences were not great. As the primary investor in the film, Rainmaker Entertainment lost around $10 million on the project themselves, quickly canceling any potential future Ratchet films that had treatments prepared, along with other projects like a previously teased film based on another PlayStation franchise, Sly Cooper. Instead of taking the film's failure to heart and understanding what went wrong, producer Michael Hefferon would instead blame other films in theaters at the time, such as Disney's live-action CGI hybrid Jungle Book remake, along with Zootopia, for eating into the family market Ratchet was aiming for. Additionally, the production label Gramercy Pictures, part of Universal Pictures' Focus Features, was used for the film's distribution. Not Sony Pictures, oddly enough. After the failure of Ratchet & Clank, the label would vanish, not to release another film under it as of 2021. The problems of the film's financial prospects could be debated for a long time, but the simple thing of it all was the movie just wasn't good. While the animation work and overall visual presentation of the Ratchet universe was well realized, the story just wasn't there. According to TJ Fixman, the original story was more character-based, focusing on the beginnings of Ratchet & Clank's relationship as they work together and even argue with each other as they grow to the partners gamers know today. With Fixman's exit and the film's director Kevin Monroe's rewrites, what was left was a generic sci-fi adventure where Ratchet & Clank barely interact at all. Ratchet even lacks much of a distinctive personality, with only the mere suggestion of his original rebellious ways, with his only real defining character trait being his naive worship of Captain Quark. His story arc goes from discovering his own strengths as a capable hero to a gullible fan who does want to be a hero but is blind to the flaws of the hero he's a fan of. Really, his only low point is feeling like he's failed as a Galactic Ranger. A pretty simple, quickly resolved character conflict, and hardly much of a relatable protagonist when there's not a lot there. The voice acting across the board from both the series' veterans and celebrity newcomers were solid, but the Douglas Adams-inspired humor of the games was mostly gone, and instead replaced with awkward attempts at meta humor with weird catchphrases, odd moments, and barf jokes.
I must say that it is curious that the sudden cessation of velocity relative to our inertia did not cause either of you to... Oh dear.
Don't worry, Cadet. It happens to the best of...
There were at least some cute nods to the series' PlayStation heritage.
That's right, lives at home 472. What's the matter? Don't like getting your butt kicked?
2016 ended up a polarizing year for Ratchet & Clank, to say the least. On one hand, the great success of the PS4 game was no surprise, continuing Insomniac's legacy of strong entries in the franchise. On the other hand, however, was the movie, now seen as a bit of a blight on the Ratchet franchise as a whole, with its poor commercial and critical performance. It's unclear if Ratchet & Clank will ever venture outside of video games again, for the big screen or small. Recently discovered in 2021 was a 24-minute short special made by Mainframe Entertainment, the new name for Rainmaker, called Ratchet & Clank Life of Pi. In the short, which seems to operate like a TV pilot of sorts, Ratchet & Clank deal with Dr. Nefarious as he uses a portal gun to access other dimensions, specifically a pizza dimension. The short is also poorly done, as it veers in the opposite direction of the film, and instead spends the majority of the time featuring Ratchet & Clank interacting, but really just arguing and bickering with each other, making for an unpleasant watching experience. Maybe the short was intended for a Ratchet TV show as a pivot from the film, but by all accounts it seems nothing was made beyond this. The short was only recently found in February 2021 when it was discovered on Canadian streaming service Crave, of all places. The credits indicate a production date of 2019, so it seems to just have been unceremoniously dumped on the service for audiences to discover. The Ratchet & Clank movie provides a lesson in adaptation and expectation. It's natural in the Hollywood movie machine for parts of a project to change, but when you lose the exact DNA that makes the property work, makes it viable for a feature film expansion, there's no saving it. As Insomniac learned with game entries like Ratchet Deadlocked, you have to innovate while not forgetting what makes it all work in the first place. At the same time, a reliance on primarily the game game audience wasn't a surefire way to box office success, especially when said movie diverted so much from the beloved franchise. There was merit to the movie with strong vocal performances by the cast and some lovely animation, but it just wasn't enough. So, while audiences wouldn't be seeing another Ratchet & Clank theatrical adventure anytime soon, the game series was still alive and kicking, and with great success for the PS4 entry meant another new game was to be in the works. But what would it be? A continuation of the reimagined universe with a redo of Going Commando? Or would it be something entirely new? Audiences wouldn't hear a thing about a new Ratchet title for some time after the 2016 entry, taking 4 years until anything new was even announced. The PS2 had 4 Ratchet & Clank titles and the PS3 6. Now the PS4 would just have the one. So, with Sony poised to announce their new game console, the logically named PlayStation 5, it was time for Insomniac to pull back the curtain on what was to be the next major entry in the Ratchet franchise, and it seemed to be the biggest, most wild, dimension-hopping ride yet. Through over 15 years of games spanning now 3 PlayStation home consoles, Ratchet & Clank had reinvented itself continuously through the years to stay fresh. From early stories with more topical humor, to later entries that unified the Ratchet universe into a cohesive sci-fi landscape, telling more ambitious, character-focused tales, the core relationship of a Lombax and a small robot was the anchor that kept everything flowing. After all, the franchise was named after them. Breaking apart their friendship, their dynamic, failing to showcase it in a meaningful way led to entries in the series, both in the game space and now the theatrical arena, that fell a bit short. Now with years upon years of storytelling under their belt, where was Insomniac to go next with their sci-fi duo? Upon the release of the Ratchet & Clank 2016 game, general audiences were left to wonder if the series would continue in this newly reimagined universe, or pick up where the last entry, Into the Nexus, left off. After all, while Ratchet had found himself content with his place in life, we still hadn't reached a full conclusion on what had actually happened to the Lombaxes. There were plans originally for Into the Nexus to reveal more about Lombax society, but those plans diverted to the saga of the Prague twins and the Nethers. A still worthwhile story, mind you, but it still left things open for a further installment to really dive into Ratchet's lost species. At the same time, Insomniac was given an early look from PlayStation on what was to be their next console, and what they were hoping to achieve on the new hardware. This got Insomniac's brain working. With more power and faster loading times promised by the new system, how could that be applied to a new Ratchet & Clank title? All ideas led back to the Dimensionator, the device that created portals to other dimensions that had been around the Ratchet series since Tools of Destruction for the PS3 in 2007, and a device that had been snagged by Clank at the end of Into the Nexus. Soon, the premise began to formulate for the new game. First of all, it would continue where Into the Nexus left off, instead of the reimagined universe from the movie and 2016 game. Second, leveraging the new power of Sony's PlayStation 5, Insomniac was going to push the series even further into the animated film realm, with environments that not only could load in faster than a player could spin a camera, but would be even more dense, more detailed than even the already stunning PS4 game. With the concept of other dimensions returning, a question was then asked that would form the basis of the new game's story. What if Ratchet had never met Clank? Things were ever-changing at Insomniac. Most significantly, the company would shed its independent status in the fall of 2019 as Sony would acquire the studio to the tune of approximately $229 million US. The Sony and Insomniac partnership would now be a permanent one as the studio would continue to bring its marquee titles to Sony systems from the current PlayStation 4 to whatever else was on the horizon, like maybe a new console. On June 11th, 2020, PlayStation streamed a live broadcast known as PS5, The Future of Gaming show. Along with revealing the brand new PlayStation 5, various games from studios of all sizes from indie to AAA were showcased running on the new hardware. Not only was Insomniac's next installment in their recent Spider-Man game series revealed as a cross-generation title, one built for PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5, but to everyone's surprise, a brand new Ratchet & Clank game was showcased. One instead built solely for the new system. The reveal was absolutely stunning and immediately showcased the incredible ambition Insomniac was aiming for with the new title. Officially revealed as Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, Ratchet was even more detailed than ever before. Clank's metallic sheen featured realistic, ray-traced reflections, and, most notably, the heroes were shown leaping through many worlds and levels at a breakneck pace, each area loading in instantly to showcase what could be achieved on the PlayStation 5. A twist, Clank is thrown from a pirate ship the duo had landed on and ends up separated. Out of nowhere, a brand new character, another Lombax, appears. Sporting a mechanical arm and a hammer, this new unnamed character set the internet on fire with speculation on her role. Not only did Insomniac showcase a cinematic trailer, but an extended pre-alpha gameplay showcase debuted, making for a splashy reveal. The classic tried and true Ratchet gameplay was here, but new weapons like the delightful topiary sprinkler, along with advanced forms of traversal with brand new rift tethers shown off, placing anticipation for the next Ratchet title as a premier PlayStation 5 exclusive not to be missed by new owners of the console. Behind the scenes, Rift Apart would be developed by both of Insomniac Studios in Burbank, California and Durham, North Carolina, just like the 2016 PS4 game. However, a relatively new creative team would be at the head with Marcus Smith serving as director, having previously directed Sunset Overdrive and Resistance 3 for Insomniac, along with Brian Horton and Mike Daly. Series writer since Tools of Destruction, TJ Fixman, had moved on from the company, so the two writers that would create Rift Apart's story would be Sam Maggs, who had previously worked on the City That Never Sleeps DLC for Marvel's Spider-Man, and Lauren Mee, a game writer whose previous credits included The Walking Dead and Batman games from Telltale Games. Previous games in the franchise had pushed the series' narrative to new places, delving into Ratchet and Clank's backstories and origins. So, where are we to go from here? Well, Rivet. Rivet was the answer. The mysterious female Lombax from the initial reveal trailer, Rivet as a character would be the symbol of the new narrative foray Insomniac would be embarking on with Rift Apart. Ratchet's dimensional counterpart who never found a companion like Clank and thus is more untrusting and nervous around people she's never met. The dichotomy of her personality with the well-established Ratchets would serve as a way to explore new depths of emotion from well-established characters to even brand new ones. So, while the interdimensional story and gameplay of Rift Apart would be the most bombastic, visually stunning to date for Insomniac, or hell, any game released up until that point, the internal journey of the character would still be just as important. Insomniac could anchor the gameplay and players' actions with a narrative well worth investing in that could dole out drama and comedy in equal measure amongst the outlandish locales and characters of the Ratchet and now Rivet universe. The general assumption with the leap to new hardware is just more. More enemies, more bolts, more objects flying in every direction. And yes, while that was true and evident in Ratchet & Clank's past, as always being a visual showcase on whatever PlayStation console they were on, the internal horsepower of the PlayStation 5 could now send players flying through different levels in an instant. A stunning technical achievement that would push the series to visual heights never thought possible before, and not being held back by previous generation technology.
This title is the first one where we made the content knowing it would only ever be running on the PlayStation 5. For this game in particular, I would say that we kind of just let our artists go wild and made some incredibly detailed objects and models and textures, and then gave ourselves the challenge to make it all run well.
As new trailers and first looks were released, the huge scope of Rift Apart became apparent to audiences everywhere. Insomniac was going big with this one. Harnessing the PS5's power, Ratchet and now Rivet were being thrown into huge situations with dozens upon dozens of enemies to fight, rich, detailed cityscapes to explore every nook and cranny in, and huge blockbuster action sequences with environments dynamically collapsing all around our heroes. The word awe-inspiring was accurate. However, the game was still Ratchet & Clank, yet the series was realizing and honestly surpassing what it meant for a game to look and feel like an interactive movie. Also, while the gameplay bones were largely the same, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, more traversal mechanics would be introduced to the series. Along with the aforementioned rift tethers, Ratchet would gain the ability to wall run and even utilize what was known as a phantom dash to dodge around enemy attacks and zoom across the void in the game's many platforming segments. It was a move refresh that was unexpected but much welcome for the series. Ratchet could even sprint now, keeping things from becoming stale. It had been nearly 5 years since the last Ratchet game, and Insomniac was here and ready to show how things could be plussed up for the new title. Narrative and gameplay always go hand in hand with most modern games, but Rift Apart would also take that a step further by integrating its own character arcs into even the mini-games. Glitch, a little spider robot program used by Ratchet to access various terminals, would get her own story arc of her own, learning to be confident in herself and realizing she's capable of doing more than she realizes. It's small touches like that that would serve as the backbone to the narrative themes Rift Apart would delve into. When it came to the overall story, beyond the dimension-hopping premise, not much was known about it. Ratchet and Clank would be separated. Somehow Dr. Nefarious was back to his old scheme, snatching the Dimensionator and causing the inciting incident for all the story's chaos, and Rivet, the new Lombax, would be coming in contact with Clank. It wasn't until the game was close to release that the curtain would finally be pulled back. In celebration of their past heroic deeds protecting the galaxy, Ratchet and Clank, retired from hero duty at this point, are celebrated with a huge parade recounting their adventures as hosted by Captain Quark, Skid McMarx, and Rusty Pete, all returning from past games. Clank presents Ratchet with a newly fixed Dimensionator, hoping he can finally find his lost Lombax family. Before Ratchet can respond, however, the ever-conniving Dr. Nefarious swoops in and snatches the device, opening portals hoping to find the dimension where he always wins. This leads to absolute chaos in the city, as Ratchet and Clank work to get to Nefarious as dinosaurs, robots, and a slew of other things fall from the sky and attack the city populace. Nefarious has also hired the recently rebranded Goons for Less to stop the duo, though they too face opposition with the dimensional chaos.
A kraken? Or at least a very large octopus.
Ratchet and Clank reach Nefarious only for them all to get sucked into Nefarious's champion dimension, landing in the dystopian Nefarious City just as the Dimensionator explodes, separating the three of them and stranding them in this dark dimension. Clank wakes up to find his arm missing and his legs malfunctioning. He's discovered by the female Lombax Rivet, a resistance fighter actively rebelling against the tyranny of Emperor Nefarious, this dimension's much more successful doctor. Ratchet himself traverses Nefarious City in search of Clank, seeing him on Rivet's back as they escape the planet. Ratchet is able to meet up with the Resistance member Phantom, an alternate dimension Skid McMarx, and join the fight as a means of finding Clank. Elsewhere, Dr. Nefarious finds that Emperor Nefarious isn't home, and assumes his identity to hopefully defeat Ratchet, and now Rivet as well, once and for all. Unable to trust the robot, Rivet takes Clank to her hideout on the planet Sargasso, and after searching his memory banks, learns the existence of Ratchet. Clank also finds he's able to interact with dimensional anomalies, meeting a monk named Gary who aids him in sealing them. Rivet helps Clank get in contact with Ratchet, and the two Lombaxes agree to work together to fix the Dimensionator and set everything right.
Wow. Another Lombax.
Landing on the planet Savali to find a blueprint for the device, Ratchet meets KT-7461, or KIT for short, a robot similar to Clank who has exiled herself to work with the monks after functioning as a warbot for Emperor Nefarious. She tells Ratchet not to be friends with her as she can malfunction and hurt him, that she's broken. But Ratchet assures her that they'll make a good team in repairing the Dimensionator.
You want to stay a team? You are very strange, Ratchet.
I've been told that a time or two. Team?
Perhaps. Just this once. Yes, I will try.
From here on, Ratchet and Rivet work across a variety of planets to gather all they need to fix the device, meeting up with various characters like the goofy Morts of Sargasso, along with Captain Quantum, the alternate Quark who has disguised himself as a pirate captain to hide from Emperor Nefarious, who finally arrives from his latest conquest and finds himself working together with the Dr. Nefarious we all know. Ratchet and Rivet, and subsequently Clank and KIT, finally meet with the now completed Dimensionator, which is unfortunately snagged by the Emperor, who decides to take the fight to Ratchet's dimension to conquer not just his universe, but all universes. Ratchet and Rivet fight to put a stop to him with the help of their interdimensional counterparts of all their friends, including a French pirate version of Rusty Pete known as Pierre, to finally put a stop to Emperor Nefarious' plans in an all-out war in Ratchet's home dimension. With both Nefarious defeated and the Dimensionator working and safe, Ratchet and Rivet now have a method to find the lost Lombaxes as they, along with Clank and KIT, head out on their next adventure.
Is that us?
With the surface retelling, Rift Apart Story is a pretty straightforward adventure with the usual wild locations and off-the-wall characters the Ratchet series is known for. But it threads the needle in such a way that it's a story that's satisfying for longtime series players and even newcomers if this is their first game in the Ratchet & Clank franchise. What makes it all work is the characters, specifically the game's best-kept secret, KIT. KIT wrestles with feelings of self-doubt and hatred of oneself that can be all too relatable. And the tragic story that KIT, back when she was solely a warbot for Emperor Nefarious, was actually the reason Rivet lost her arm, hits home as KIT learns to believe in herself and Rivet learns to trust and forgive, growing enormously throughout the adventure. The same goes for Ratchet and Clank, with the titular Lombax struggling to feel like he's ready to actually find the Lombaxes, and realizing that the journey is worth taking even if he's happy with his life with Clank and his friends. It all comes together with the series' signature shooting, platforming gameplay, eclectic planets, and bombastic action set pieces, making Rift Apart one of the grandest Ratchet & Clank titles Insomniac's ever created. When the game released in June of 2021, audiences and critics agreed. While the 2016 game was reviewed positively, there were still a fair amount of shortcomings due to it being tied in with the poorly received theatrical film. With Rift Apart, the praise was near unanimous. Compliments were naturally given to the game's visuals, as Rift Apart was one of the most visually stunning games of all time at release, and that's no exaggeration. Insomniac had always crafted amazing worlds across their development history, but Rift Apart was on a whole new level. The Pixar comparison that had always prevailed was apt. You really were playing an animated movie. The narrative too was also praised for really reaching emotional heights of films as well, featuring a narrative that was still hilarious amongst the more turmoil-fueled cast.
Password, please.
Why do I need a password? I'm the Emperor. How about I obliterate you instead? Ha 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 ha!
While we still hadn't gotten to meet the Lombaxes in full, Rift Apart definitely set the stage for more potential stories in the series, with little morsels and Easter eggs, like the Lombax-created Lorbs found on the planet Savali, doling out backgrounds on the Lombax's escape from Tachyon into another dimension, while also referencing a fellow PlayStation franchise or two.
And there were these creatures. One of them even looked like a Lombax, but he had smaller ears, a mask, and a cane, and I think he was pulling some kind of heist?
From a whole slate of new wacky weapons, dozens of new characters, and a heartfelt, funny story, Rift Apart was the refresh the Ratchet franchise needed, somehow towing the line for old and new fans, and opening up the Ratchet universe even more, with so many potential jumping off points for new stories it practically boggles the mind. Infinite dimensions, infinite stories, infinite possibilities. The real success came in crafting a story for everyone to enjoy.
We wanted to bring in new players to a franchise that has been around forever and has a ton of backstory, so we had to ask, how do we do it without doing a reboot, because you don't want to get rid of all the work you've done?
The cinematic story was also accompanied with cinematic music, as the franchise would receive new composers in Mark Mothersbaugh, a composer who had run the Gambit projects-wise from the original Nickelodeon cartoon Rugrats to Marvel blockbusters with Thor Ragnarok, and Wataru Hokoyama of Mutato Musica, a music production company co-founded by Mothersbaugh. The music duo would contribute to the gaming duo's adventures with a gorgeous, sweeping score fittingly as grand as the gameplay and story witnessed by players, and hey, maybe a show tune or two. From music to gameplay to story, as written by Sam Maggs and Lauren Mee, Rift Apart was a resounding success for Insomniac and Sony. Rift Apart would be the second biggest game launch for the less than a year old PlayStation 5, only behind Insomniac's own Spider-Man Miles Morales. After nearly 20 years of existence, Ratchet & Clank were still here to stay. Ratchet & Clank, the sci-fi comedy gem of the PlayStation 2 era, has exploded into gaming's most recognizable and beloved franchise of all time. Transcending the game space into other forms of media and merchandise, the Lombax and Bot have been everywhere, from movies to manga, and at this point there's no sign of fatigue, no sign of slowing down. Journeying through now 4 console generations, reinventing itself along the way, from programming, to writing, to design, to sound, to, well, everything. It's a testament to the talent of the Insomniacs, the creatives in every single department that worked hard to bring the universe to players everywhere that should be praised endlessly from coast to coast. A crash landing meet cute, foiling the plans of an evil business tycoon, putting a stop to a rampaging corporate experiment, fighting a mad scientist and a pop star trying to destroy organic life, an evil, heavily merchandised game show, fighting the bane of the Lombax existence, discovering their past and finding their place in the universe. And now, discovering even more universes and finding companionship with someone who's so similar, yet so different. So many adventures Ratchet & Clank have been on, each memorable in their own way, saving the galaxy numerous times over. It's been an adventure for them and players for now almost 20 years. From the beginning, Ted Price had set out to create wonderful experiences in the home console gaming space. Beginning with a company called Extreme Software, and later a game called Disruptor in 1996, who could have expected that his game company, now and forever known as Insomniac Games, would reach such incredible heights? The gaming industry expanded and flew forward with technology at an incredibly rapid pace, and Insomniac has kept up all the while, crafting stunning worlds, memorable characters, and just fun experiences for players young and old. From a Doom clone to a purple dragon to a superhero and all the way up to Rift Apart, Insomniac set out to achieve a vision of positivity and diversity in story and character in the interactive space to create lasting memories for all that experiences them. To have a franchise such as Ratchet & Clank last through the majority of the studio's existence, with the franchise somehow nearing its 20th anniversary and still going strong, is an achievement to be celebrated. Video games are a product of a team effort, and even with small missteps, there's always been a strong force behind each Ratchet & Clank title to make it iconic in their own way. Video games themselves are a product still so new in so many ways, and to feature such a lasting franchise like Ratchet & Clank is simply put a stunning achievement. Through its history of highs and even lows, Insomniac's franchise truly belongs in the Hall of Fame of gaming titans. Now it's just a matter of where their story will go next.